It is 3 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I'm going to begin. Listen, I will, as ever, be putting the boot into right-wing media later in the programme, particularly because they are the worst example of that grisly phenomenon, the Daily Mail. But I don't know if I've ever recommended that you read something in that dismal organ. But I am going to today. There is a remarkable piece on page 5, written by someone called Andreas Christoforos. And it appears under the horrible headline, How It Feels to Have Your Face Melted by Chemicals. And as the search for this man believed to have committed the alkaline or the chemical attacks in Clapham in South London continues, Abdul Azaidi, to be avoided at all costs, according to police. We'll keep you up to date throughout the day with any developments in that search for the suspect, and you're legally required to describe him as a suspect who is suspected of committing these crimes. This piece is, I don't often stop, when everything goes quiet around you while you're reading something. It doesn't happen to me very often, and I've had the great privilege as well of interviewing Katie Piper, who suffered a similar attack as well, and it is extraordinary. There is more going on when a man attacks a woman in this way than there is, I think, with any other form of attack. I don't know that I can expand upon what I mean by that. It's more feeling than intellectual analysis, but it is gross. If you want intellectual analysis, then I would point out how nice it would be, bearing in mind how many people have suffered from these sort of attacks, how nice it would be if some corners of the country and even perhaps the media could focus upon the plight of the victim and the importance of catching the suspect rather than his ethnicity or his asylum status, which has obviously no bearing whatsoever upon the horror currently being suffered by his victims. I wanted to get that out of the way because I think it's important, and because I always do that. I always if something really, really slaps me around the face like a wet fish, then I want to tell you about it. I want to, stops me in my tracks. I want to tell you about it, and now I have. 6 minutes after 10 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, and we'll turn our attention first this morning to a strange story. I don't know if you picked it up. To be honest, my ears pricked up when I heard it in the bulletin. The idea that 2 months before it is due to start, a trial will launch to tempt people into the nursery sector by giving them a £1,000 golden handshake. This is because Rishi Sunak has been warned by many people that his expansion of free childcare could be completely scuppered by staff shortages. It's supposed to start in April. And I have this, I don't know if obsession is quite the right word, but I have a deep interest in subjects about which you know nothing until you have to know everything. And childcare is one of the weirdest because it is a subject about which you know nothing until you need to know everything. I read this from Mick in Sutton Coldfield, and it really resonates with my own thoughts on the subject. He says, given the horrendously high cost of childcare and the offensively low wages that childcare staff get paid, one has to wonder who is making a lot of money out of this. And I don't know, A, whether anybody is, or B, if they are, who it is. We shall find out, no doubt, in the course of this morning. But the idea that by offering £1,000 to people 2 months before it's due to start, or where are we, February, March? Yeah, 2 months, crikey. 2 months before it's due to start suggests to me that we've got another epic fail on the horizon, haven't we? We've got another huge disaster on our horizon. And I think it is a huge disaster because, unless you're absolutely in the middle of it, I don't think people realise that if you want to go back to work once your child is of a certain age, then you are going to have to. It is now commonplace for people to be earning roughly what they're spending. It's Mr. McCorber territory, isn't it? Do you know, I must check that Mr. McCorber quote because I reference it all the time and I never remember it entirely accurately. The central premise of it is that if your income matches your outgoings, result happiness. But if your income is even a pfennig, even a shilling lower, a penny lower than your outgoings, result misery. It's a fairly odd reflection upon what was commonplace or common wisdom in the 19th century to think that most of us live our lives in constant debt these days with mortgages and property ownership. But your mortgage, of course, your mortgage payment or your rent is one of your outgoings. So if your monthly income is greater than your monthly outgoings, result happiness. And if your monthly income is lower than your monthly outgoings, result misery. And here we are. I mean, looking at people for whom childcare pushes them quite violently into the space where monthly income is not as high as monthly outgoings. The costs are extraordinary. But I don't want to attack people who run the nurseries. I just want to prick you into calling, really. I want you to explain to me why so many parents like me do feel a little bit baffled about where the money goes. Don't get cross with me for asking that question. Someone got very cross with me last time we did this subject. I'm perfectly comfortable with people getting cross with me, but I do sometimes think that I don't deserve it. And so I'm only asking the question. I'm giving you the opportunity to tell people like me and like Mick in Sutton Coldfield and like loads of other people getting in touch that it is unfair to point out how much the costs are. And Joanna in Barnes is, I don't know if she's cross with me, but she's using capital letters to say, please, when you start talking about this childcare being rolled out for two-year-olds, can you not call it free? Please call it funded. The government doesn't pay a rate that reflects the true cost, and they treat all nursery businesses the same regardless of their costs, which is ridiculous. Early years practitioners are not highly paid and never will be unless there is a lot more government funding or the ratios of children to staff change. They cannot possibly say it will be ready. I was recently refused more visa sponsorship licenses by the Home Office. I wanted to go from 2 till 6. So where will I get the staff from? And £1,000 for 1 year only is actually very little. So I quite like subjects like this. I quite like conversations like this because, in a sense, we've all got skin in the game, whether you realise it or not. The workforce from which you will pick your staff or from which your colleagues will be chosen depends in part on how many parents can go back to work when they want to, as opposed to having to stay out of work because the cost of childcare is so prohibitive. I also like it because it's a subject about which I don't know everything. I think I know something, so I'm not going to say I don't know anything, but you've got 100,000 parents registering for funded childcare codes ahead of the scheme kicking in, and no way really of knowing how many of them are going to be disappointed and what the consequences of disappointment will be. It is 2 months until kick-off, so some people somewhere, hopefully listening to this programme at this moment, will know a hell of a lot more about this subject than I do, or indeed perhaps than you do. And if you are one of those people, 0345 6060 973. I think it's a conversation also about recruitment. I think it's a conversation about recruitment. So it's about cost, recruitment, and politics. Question number 1, is this going to work? And I don't know who's best qualified to answer that question, but if you think that you are, you know what to do. Is this going to work? I mean, a scheme that depends upon recruitment, launching a rather desperate-looking attempt to accelerate recruitment 2 months before kick-off looks to me like a disaster in the offing. But of course I could be wrong. My first message on the subject from someone who clearly runs a nursery, complaining that she has been rejected by the Home Office in her attempt to secure 4 more sponsorship licenses than she currently has. You have to presume that before applying for those licenses, Joanna would have moved heaven and earth to recruit locally. Barnes is in South London, a part of the country I know very well, and South West London, to be precise. Wrong side of the river, but it's still a lovely part of the world. And you kind of find the government, again, with the immigration obsession, seems to be operating in a parallel universe, where it's very important to stop people coming here, even though immigration's roughly doubled since Brexit, which, of course, was sold to you as a way to reduce immigration, should you care about such things. And yet, at the same time, acknowledging that employers are finding it almost impossible to fill the vacancies that they need. And in this case, the politics kicks in fast after the recruitment and the cost question, because this is one of the few things that Rishi Sunak is hoping to point to as a political success. Well, I introduced 15 hours of funded childcare for hundreds of thousands of children up and down the country. When we get to the middle of April, Are we going to be sitting here wondering why on earth more warning bells were not sounded, both in politics and beyond? And should we be breaking the glass and hitting the button together today? So who is qualified to answer this question? Joanna clearly is. You are, if you are running childcare facilities. How much chaos is on the horizon? I always stress this because I'm not one of those people that thinks the only news is bad news. If you think it might work, and it might work quite well, 0345 6060 973. But, I mean, the idea that someone who has never expressed the vaguest interest in working with young children before is, in response to a £1,000 sweetener, going to be ready to go by April seems to me to be a little bit ambitious. So what do you think of that? 20 local authorities in England in April will give new recruits, which is a worry, and returners, which is less than a worry, the tax-free cash payment. So you take up a job in April as a new recruit. Doesn't that mean you'd have to get all your criminal checks done now? Well, you'd have to get all your criminal checks done between now and April. Can you do that? Is it that easy? Do you not need any training to work in nurseries? And does it matter? So why is childcare crucial to you? And what does the cost do to your finances? That's a phone-in we've had many times in the past. The one we've never had before is this. Does this scheme look fit for purpose to you? And is a £1,000 sweetener going to help fill the gaps that currently pepper the entire sector? Oh, is it DBS checks? It's DBS checks. That's probably a worry, isn't it? It's February already. I know, it crept up out of nowhere, didn't it? It's February already. It's a leap year this year, I think. So at least that gives them an extra day, doesn't it, to recruit people? Do you think they've said that around the cabinet table? Well, the good news, Minister, is that it is actually a leap year. So we have one day more than we would have had last year to find people that employers desperately looking for people have so far been unable to find. But we are confident that by giving them £1,000 once, they will change their life ambitions and sign up to a job that they've never previously expressed any interest whatsoever in doing. The number you need is 0345 6060 973. I'm always wary of the question, how big a deal is this, potentially? But every now and then it's the correct question to ask. I don't know about you. I just got a feeling that the vultures are circling on Rishi Sunak's childcare plans. And the fact that they are 2 months before launch offering £1,000 to people to sign up to it as staff rather adds to the sense of concern, doesn't it? But I could, of course, be wrong. Kim's in Sheffield. Kim, what made you pick up the phone?
Oh, hi, James. I'm a bit nervous.
It's only me. My mum's from Sheffield. Yeah, we're practically family.
Oh. And I'm from Irish background too. I'm Scottish. But anyway, one of the questions that hasn't been asked is how long are all the DBS checks going to take for all these members of staff?
Well, you tell me.
Well, they can take up to 6 weeks.
Crikey. And that's in normal times. That's in normal times.
And in childcare, you have the enhanced DBS checks. So that's a cost to either the individual or the nursery itself on top of everything else. Mm. And £1,000 wouldn't get me back in, I'm afraid.
So why did you leave?
Well, I left because I have my own children.
Yes.
And it was more financially beneficial for me to stay at home and look after my kids than get paid in a nursery.
And what would tempt you back? Better wages all the time rather than... It's quite patronising, isn't it, for these people, particularly all these multimillionaires in the cabinet, to think, well, if we give the plebs £1,000, they'll completely tear up their life plans and sign up to rescue this scheme that we've bet the house on, or bet other people's houses on.
Exactly. It's not worth it. The pay is... Sorry, I'm waffling.
No, you take your time.
In 94, I was working in a nursery, and I was probably on a salary of about £10,000. I mean, I don't know what the salary is now for somebody working in a nursery, but I don't think it'd be much more than that.
What? Just because I don't think there is a sort of an evil stepmother figure somewhere counting gold bullion or living in Barbados. But for parents who can't afford it and who struggle to pay it, where does all the money go? It's an expensive business, I presume, running a nursery.
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean,
it doesn't go to you, does it? That's the point.
Yeah. Well, one nursery I worked in was a private enterprise, and they had several private nurseries. And the person who was the owner was, a multi-business owner of all kinds. Yes. And, and he did drive sports cars. So,
but you mean that money is coming in from a variety of sources? How much profit they're making out of a private nursery? I don't know. Some must make a lot of money. Some of the ones I've seen around where the kids get quinoa and picked up by their chauffeurs are presumably paying through the nose. But I'm thinking more about the normal ones. The people who get in touch with me, I'm saying £1,500 a month, or I can't afford to pay this, or I pay more in childcare than I earn as a nurse, and things like that. Where does all that money go?
I know it's a question I've asked, because if you think of the staff, also one of the things I think the Tories brought in, but I could be wrong on this, is the ratio of adults to children.
Yes.
So I think they reduced the amount of adults per, they reduced the ratio, I think.
Right.
So you could have fewer staff.
Oh, but then that's because if something then goes wrong and somebody says, well, it was because I was too busy, or it was because I didn't. I don't know. You're right, though. We should. The devil is in the detail. Kim, thank you. So there's the DBS checks, looking at about an average of 6 weeks, apparently. Kim's information, if it's out of date, then I'll bet you £1 to a penny. Is it £1 to a penny or a penny to a pound? I bet you a lot of money that if it's changed since Kim was in the sector, the waiting time is longer now than it was, not shorter. £1,000 for people. How are they going to get into... How is this going to work? Some people pointing out it is as much Jeremy Hunt's wheeze as it is Rishi Sunak's, although it is very much being described in most of the conservative-leaning media as Rishi Sunak's scheme. And there is a campaign on the way. They're going to spend £6.5 million worth of our money on a campaign to encourage people who have worked in the sector before to return, as well as finding new starters. It's called the Do Something Big campaign. Well, look, I hope I'm wrong. But I am losing confidence, if I had any to start with, in how this whole thing is going to unfold. Thank you, Kim. Valerie's in Islington. Valerie, what would you like to say?
Morning, Brian. I hope you're well.
I'm fantastic, John. Thank you.
I'm just so stressed out.
You are, aren't you? You've called me Brian, and then you called me O'Brien. I'm not at school, Valerie. It's like being back at school. No one calls me O'Brien since I left school in 1990. It's honestly, you can call me James if you want.
Oh, do you know what it is? I'm not going to lie to you. I'm just so stressed. It just feels like that gimmick of get Brexit done. Let's just throw 1K education and get everyone back in, right? Look. I'm just going to keep it real here and short and sweet.
Please.
You've got SEND issues. You've got post the pandemic. You need people to have first aid mental health training. You need to make sure that even people are mentally okay and stable to go and work in these settings again. I used to work in the early setting, private as well. And it was well run. But my thing is that things have changed. Children, young people are changing, and you can't just put anyone and everyone back into the system where it's already very broken. You've got travel expenses to take into consideration. You've got food, utility bills, 1,000, and even how much you will earn in your first year would not even balance the books, if that makes sense. And then going back to the setting itself, the DBS thing the previous caller spoke about, and you've been mentioning it, that is a massive worry, because we all know what happens when you try to do things, ad hocly. You need to be thorough with these things, and I'm not convinced that they will be able to do the specific checks to get the right people back in so that we can safeguard our children and young people.
Well, you know what you're talking about. I bet you don't know any numbers, because I've searched everywhere this morning, and the only number I can find is that more than 100,000 parents have registered, but an awful lot of them, of course, will already have children in childcare. They're just taking advantage of the fact that they won't have to pay for 15 hours worth of it anymore. But the coalition of sort of childcare providers, the Early Years Alliance, the Early Education and Childcare Coalition has found that only 17% of nursery managers have said that they're going to increase the number of places offered. So if the take-up rate from parents is considerably higher than the offer rate from nurseries, regardless of recruitment levels, that's another massive problem on the horizon. On a scale of 1 to 10, How big a problem? How big a mess do you think this might be by the end of April?
Can I be honest with you? It's going to be. I don't want to swear it's live TV or radio.
No, just use a number.
It's going to be.
Scale of 1 to 10. You don't have to swear.
Oh, okay. Yeah, within 0, because I don't think you can get off the ground.
So you got right. So you're doing it. I mean, usually people take the 10 as the highest, but you're taking the 0. So you're saying on a scale of 1 to 10, as a disaster, it will be a 10, but as a scale of as a success, it will be a 0.
Yeah, 100%. It will, because you've got to look at the long term. And we can't go away from the fact that we do not have the staff. The ratio thing is also an issue. Yeah. And I brought in the fact about the SEND and the post the pandemic and the first aid.
I don't know what they're talking about. Are you still in the sector?
No. So I left because of, no offence, but Michael Gove, because there was so many...
Did you have to look after him? Did you have to look after him? Seriously, if I had to change Michael Gove's nappy, I'd have been out like a bat out of hell, Valerie, honestly.
It became more about paperwork instead of actually doing the work that I wanted to do. So I went to primary, and now I'm in secondary school. Gosh. You've got so many members of staff absent. Head teachers and even those that are running the sector, private sector, are getting agency staff in. You're recruiting more younger people that sometimes it's not their fault, but they're a little bit, inexperienced. They don't have the patience. They don't have, that approach that...
the last thing you want, in a way, is to attract people who are going to have their head turned by the prospect of a £1,000 single payment to do a job they've never had any particular interest or desire to do before. Before you go, would you like to play a little game?
100%.
Oh, hang on, you've almost spoilt it now, because the answer is a percentage, oddly, but don't say 100%. Okay. I'm not giving you the option. So... research at the end of last year found that what percentage of nursery staff were considering leaving the sector in the next year? Was it 7%, 37%, or 57% of nursery staff who were considering leaving the sector in the next year, Valerie?
57%.
My God, you got it!
Do I win anything?
Oh, yes, you win a round of applause. There you go. That's it. Have a lovely day, Valerie. Next time you ring, don't call me Brian. Otherwise, I'll take that round of applause back. There's 2 reasons why people call me Brian for radio anoraks. Well, 3, I suppose. One is they haven't got the first idea who I am, and they just hear me say I'm James O'Brien, and they just remember the last bit. The second is they get nervous, like Valerie did, and just sort of say the first thing that comes into their head. And the third, which probably, now I've been here for 20, or stressed, not just nervous, I've been here for 20 years. We should have some sort of celebration. The third reason is that when I took over this slot, it was still associated, although he hadn't done it for a while, it was still associated with one of the gods of speech radio, one of the finest practitioners of the art that this country has ever produced, the inimitable Brian Hayes. So for quite a long time, I almost took it as a compliment. It only happens about twice a year. But for quite a long time, I almost took it as a compliment. But I don't anymore. It's coming up to 10:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Here's Lottie Morley. It is 10:34. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I've got a rather splendid woke watch for you today. That's coming up later. It's quite a special one, actually. It's a bit more complicated than the usual woke watch because it involves a comparison of 2 things coming from the same space rather than simply one thing coming from one space that is incredibly ridiculous and laughable. And I'm not quite sure how to play smear care today, because it's everywhere, this attempt to portray Labour reconsidering its £28 billion pledge to spend on green investment. And listen, I am aware of my bias. Does it count as a bias if you don't want lying disasters to stay in power and you just want someone else to have a go? Is that bias? I don't know. Maybe it is. I'm biased against lying disaster zones like Rishi Sunak and the rest of them. But it seems to me perfectly reasonable. If I announced before Liz Truss became Prime Minister that, all being well, I'll be spending £28 billion on green investment, and then after Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng set fire to the economy, I've had to have a bit of a rethink. I think that's perfectly reasonable. But if you look at some right-wing media today, they're trying to portray it as lying, and they're comparing it, and this is proper funny, to lies that Boris Johnson told, without pointing out that the big difference here is saying, I'm going to do something on Wednesday. You say on Monday, I'm going to do something on Wednesday. And then on Tuesday, you say, actually, my plans have changed. Turns out it's snowing. We're not going to be able to go swimming on Wednesday because it's snowing. And you're pretending that that's the same as saying on Thursday, I went swimming yesterday, even though you didn't. So Boris Johnson lied about having built 40 hospitals. He lied about having got all the big calls right during COVID. He lied to the House of Commons and then lied about lying to the House of Commons. He's lied about everything, really, in the course of his life, to his wives, to his constituents, to his employers, to Parliament, to his bosses. I'm not sure Boris Johnson has ever met anybody to whom he hasn't lied. And some of the right-wing media this morning is trying to pretend that that's the same as Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves saying £28 billion on green pledges before Liz Truss's budget, and then saying after Liz Truss's budget, do you know what? Once we get into Parliament, we're going to have to look. If we get into power, we're going to have a little look at what we can and can't do. And although we remain very, very keen to spend as much as we humanly can on green investment, and are certainly ploughing ahead with this and this and this and this, that overall figure may have been rendered impossible by the disaster of Tory government, particularly Liz Truss, which most estimates put at about 30 billion quid, which is, of course, 2 billion quid more than they wanted to spend on green events. So actually, I think we will play. I think that counts. I've gone into so much detail telling you about what I was going to do later that now I don't need to do it later. I just need to do this.
Woke Watch.
That was Smear Keir, mate. Keith, come here, mate. Come here, right? I just spent 5 minutes, right, talking about how the right-wing media is trying to portray Keir Starmer as a liar, yeah? When he's not lied. So what does that mean? One job. One job, but to be fair, 2 buttons. Or is it the same button? You just move your mouse before you press. Yeah, they're next to each. It's an easy mistake to make. Let's hear it again because it's so lovely. And I did do the dance for the people watching on YouTube. 10:37 is the time. Back to childcare. I hope I'm wrong, but this looks like an absolute dog's dinner. There you go. I always want to use the word from Thick of It, which you can't use on the radio. Obviously, Ofcom would be all over me like a cheap suit. But dog's dinner is a good word. It's not as good as cluster bleep, but it looks to me like we've got a dog's dinner on the horizon. Sarah is in Berwick-upon-Tweed, a beautiful part of the world. What would you like to say, Sarah?
You'll have to forgive me because I'm very cross. I'm very, very stressed.
Why should I forgive you for being cross? Being cross is important. If you don't get cross, they get away with it. Well, they probably get away with it anyway. They've
been getting away with it for 14 years. They've absolutely decimated the childcare system in this country. The Sure Starts and everything were absolutely superb, and we had a good culture of working together, both with the schools and the local services for families, and it's just falling to bits around our ears. And this is just like another nail in the coffin. Can you imagine if I employ 1 or 2 people in the next few weeks to help with this? I'm a director of a nursery.
Okay.
And if I do that, how are the rest of my staff going to feel when these people who are new to the job come in and get £1,000 extra? Why, if that is going to get them in, why don't we give it to the people who are working day in,
I love you, Sarah.
day out, do it?
I love you, Sarah.
I am so angry about it. They haven't even got round to telling us how they're funding it and how much we're getting. The consultation is just coming out.
Well, as in how much you will get per child. They've told the parents they're getting it for nothing, but they haven't told you how much you're getting to provide it.
No.
What?
No.
Crikey. The reason I love you is that sometimes I don't say things in my introduction because I have enormous faith that one of my callers will raise the point later, and I don't want to tick all the boxes and cross all the T's by 20 past 10 in the morning. But I had a genuine. I said, "What if you're already working there?" And Johnny Come Lately turns up with £1,000 poking out of his back pocket. It's going to cause all sorts of tensions in the workplace.
I would love to give everybody £1,000. At the moment, we're trying to go through our budget to make sure we can do the living wage cost rises for the living wage. We're a not-for-profit. We don't make a huge amount. This is what's got me really cross. You think we're rolling around in big cars.
No, I know.
I
don't think that.
Any money.
A lot of these places are not-for-profit, aren't they?
Yeah, a lot of them are. We're a charity.
There you go.
So we kind of get grants to help and do that. But if you think about it, if you look at how it's set up,
yes.
If we have the under ones, we're on a ratio of 1 to 3. I know Gove said we could go up to 5.
Right.
And I said to my staff, I'm not doing that to you because actually I want the children to have safe, quality care.
Yes.
And I personally would not want you stressed to the hilt looking after 5 tiny people. So we do. So if it's funded, let's say at £10, which it's not, an hour for those to have it, that's £30 that member of staff brings in if she's got all 3 of them. If one of them's off, obviously you get less. But that's got to cover her wages
Yes.
of another person, because you have to have 2 people in the room
of course
with
you
those
do.
3.
Yes.
It's got to cover the heating, the lighting, all of the resources that they have, all of everything, and any extra staff that we have in for the management side of it or the admin side of it who aren't in the room, or if somebody is off on training, doing their first aid, paediatric training, or getting all of that. It's got to cover all of the insurances. It's got to cover the money we pay to Ofsted. It's got to cover the money we pay to the nursery associations. It's got to cover everything.
What's going to happen in April?
What's going to happen in April is there are going to be a lot of very upset parents. I mean, if we rebranded and we said this is subsidised, then that would help, and then they do a top-up bit of it. That would help of it.
So you take whatever the government... Hang on, let me understand what you've said already. So by that you mean you'd take the funding the government provides, but tell parents they'll have to top up that anyway.
Yeah.
So it's not 15. So free is a really unhelpful word here. In fact, I can't believe they're using the word free if you don't know, as the provider, how much you're going to get per child. That's absolutely bonkers.
Yeah, we got a consultation document out this week.
Right.
That
Well,
tells
keep me
us
posted,
roughly
won't
what
you?
we might be getting.
Keep me posted, Sarah, please, if you're not too busy.
Yeah. But because they're giving it to counties, and then it depends how the counties top slice it and send it through. And it depends on how many you get. But it's also, you've got to think, most of these buildings are there anyway, and you can only have a certain number of children in to the size of the room. There are guidelines on how many you can have in, so you can't suddenly have an influx of another 10 children if you haven't got space in the room, let alone not having the staff to do it. And we're 2 months away?
Here's the thing. If I'm a parent and I haven't got a childcare spot yet for April, and I've got a code, how likely do you think it is that my code's not worth the paper that it's printed on? If I haven't got a space now, if I haven't got a space now,
it will depend where you are in the country.
Yes,
and it will depend on yours. I mean, because a lot of rural places, you only have one nursery covering a big area. Or you have one in a village, or
so you're in a rural area, so it's a different proposition. Have you got any spaces?
We have a few. Okay. We're working with our parents to get them online and get them registered and get them sorted.
Right.
We are moving a thing.
But do you have vacancies? Do you have vacancies in your?
We have a waiting list.
So you don't have vacancies.
We have a few in a few rooms.
Okay.
And we're mainly looking for September.
Right.
We don't think we're going to get many sorted by April. We've already done that. We've already talked to them and started the settling in and
that's what
doing
I mean.
that.
That's what's so odd about the idea.
But it's also, I'm sorry, but 15 hours doesn't actually help many people go back to work.
Is there anything good about this plan?
I keep trying. I do think families need a lot of help with
I do too.
Supporting childcare. I do think that we need to raise the profile. I think one good thing about this plan, it's got people talking, and it's got people realising that the problem's in it, but it's not a magic wand that is going to solve it. The funding that is actually going in isn't going to touch the size. The number of nurseries that are closing and have closed over the last few years is horrendous.
57% of staff in them now thinking of leaving in the next year. You haven't got me on in the nursery, have you? That wouldn't be fair on the children. That'd be like
I'm not in the nursery.
No, it's good because that'd be like a sort of infant Guantanamo Bay, wouldn't it?
I don't want the nursery targeted.
No, but also, I didn't want your staff to hear what I'm about to say, Sarah.
My staff are absolutely wonderful.
I know they are, but you don't know what I'm going to say yet.
Go on then.
If I was working for you, I'd resign today and then reapply and get £1,000.
Yeah, but we'd have to do all the interviews again, and we'd have to do all the checks again.
But I'd get £1,000.
Yeah, but the nursery would end up spending a hell of a lot more money.
I know. That's another reason why it's a stupid idea. It's another reason why it's a stupid idea.
But it's not in every area as well.
It's only in 20.
£1,000 isn't for every area of the country.
No,
it's targeted.
Yeah, and you can see why. But equally, someone's about to start working in an area where it's not getting £1,000, and they go online and think, "Oh, hang on a minute, I'll ring up that one over there, and I'll go and It's almost as if these people have not got the first idea what they're doing. But that's unbelievable, isn't it? In the context of being the actual government. Sarah, thank you. I don't just sense, I understand your profound concerns, and I'm conscious of having to keep the conversation fairly light-hearted, but don't think for a minute that I'm unappreciative of the seriousness, the profundity of your fears and your concerns. And it's almost as if after 14 years of muffing everything up, they've decided to come and really sort of finish the job. 10:50, and this is the radio. For most of you, I appreciate some people. I'm not expecting any prizes for that observation, but I can tell you that the public space has just received an image that will be burnt into our collective retina for generations. The killers of the schoolgirl Brianna Ghey have just been named in court. It's a decision of the presiding judge. And as with perhaps the photograph of Venables and Thompson leading James Bulger away from the shopping centre before murdering him, that photograph for people of a certain age and beyond probably the nature of social media these days is burnt into our collective retina, isn't it? It's burnt into our collective consciousness, that's a better word. And the two killers of Brianna Ghey have just been both named and photographed, something that we will talk about after the news. Because I don't know what to make of it. I genuinely don't know what purpose it serves. I found the story heartbreaking, not least because Brianna was transgender. And there was just a very brief window in the British media because she had been murdered. When being transgender, someone who was transgender didn't get attacked and undermined in British newspapers. Just that's what you have to do if you want to get a relatively sympathetic write-up from most British newspapers and you are trans. You have to get killed. That was one of the reasons why I found the story so unbearable, and another reason was because of the age of the killers, and you find yourself not feeling sorry for them, really, unless you're a much more devout Christian than I've ever managed to be, but feeling sorry for who they could have been. I don't believe anybody is born evil any more than I believe that your asylum status has any bearing at all upon your propensity to throwing acid in people's faces. But again, of course, plenty of money to be made by pretending that is true and that you do believe that, but you no one's born evil. And these two people whose names are kind of sticking on my tongue a bit. Not that it makes any difference whatsoever, because you won't be able to turn a television on in the country at the moment without seeing both of them staring back out at you. Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe have been named as their killers. But what purpose does that serve as their sentencing is handed down? We'll ask after 11 today. Back to the altogether lighter, although perhaps no less complex territory of Rishi Sunak's childcare scheme that seems set to please precisely nobody. Actually, it's 10:53. You've got until 11 o'clock. Give me a ring if it's working for you. You've got time. We've got a couple of phone lines free. You need to be quick. 0345 6060 973. Either as a childcare provider or a parent, you know exactly what's going to happen in April, and it's really working for you. Okay? You know me, I'm a huge fan of balance, and that would be a nice way of balancing out all of the rather pessimistic predictions that we have enjoyed so far. Joanne's in Feltham. Joanne, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Yeah, I just wanted to say this £1,000, it really doesn't make a lot of sense. I own 4 nurseries in the Hounslow Borough. Okay. So we're fully funded because not a lot of parents are working, or if they are...
What does fully funded mean?
Well, your entitlement, so 30 hours, or I take the 2-year deprived children.
Right.
So,
you're speaking as if I know as much about this sector as you do.
Yeah. So basically what I'm saying is with that £1,000 incentive, who's it actually targeted at? And we've not been told anything about it. And
yes, you have. I've been talking about it. I've been talking about it all morning. Well, what am I, chopped liver?
So if we had somebody that was returning, generally they've left because the money was never good enough in the first place, or they wanted a different progression. So if they're returning, is their heart really going to be in it? And I generally believe if you're going to work with children, you need to have a passion for it.
Yes.
If they are youngsters that come in, they would then need to start or take tests to see whether they go on for a level 2 or a level 3, which is generally down to me as a setting to find a provider. Although the government will help me with the funding of that, it's not as easy as it seems. They have to have time out to go training. I have to put an awful lot of work in behind the scenes.
So if I turned up today, and I live in the borough of Hounslow, so I could probably work it out quite easily. If I turned up today, how soon, best case scenario, could I be starting work?
Well, once we've got your DBS, which to be fair, like they say, 4 to 6 weeks, you could then start work if I was happy with how you went at the interview.
Okay.
I'd also have to get references in place as well beforehand.
No problemo. I'll get Keith.
Then I would give you about a week on the floor before you turned to me and said, wow, where's my extra money?
Yeah.
This is absolute. I'm going home tired, worn out, mentally exhausted.
Yeah.
It's a tough job.
Let's not get carried away here, Joanne. I speak some days for 3 hours almost uninterrupted into this microphone. So let's not get carried away with whose job is tough. Okay.
Mm-hmm. But again, if those starters then come in, when do they get given that £1,000? Is it straight away, or is it 6 months in? Because generally, if they get, it will get to 6 months, and we'll find that they either continue or they leave us. So then what happens with that £1,000?
And what are you going to do once they've cashed the cheque and they don't want to be there anymore?
Throwing all these £1,000 out when actually what we could do is have it increased on the funding so that we can then increase the wages of my staff.
It's a nuts idea. The more I think about it, the madder it looks. It's absolutely bonkers, this idea.
It's just throwing.
You're going to have to lock the doors once they've cashed the cheque.
Don't understand what we do. It's just saying, look, we've given it a solution, but actually us in childcare are saying this is absolutely pointless. It gives us absolutely nothing. I agree with Sarah.
Yes.
The funding rates aren't confirmed. I've got an idea of what it is.
Go on, tell me what you think it is.
Well, for our borough, which is very generous, to be fair, I'm going to give Hounslow their credit. They were an amazing early years team.
It's all the council tax I pay.
Amount, Yes. So I'm looking at about £6.19 an hour for a 3 and 4 year old.
Okay, so you times that by 3, 4, or 5.
It's gone up by 6p.
Yeah.
But the pay rise that I'm looking to increase for everyone in April, which the government is setting, is over £1.
Yeah.
So the two don't tally, and everything's getting more expensive. The electricity's gone up. The business rates haven't changed.
My rent goes up.
My rent goes up. The cost of we don't ask parents to provide the food in the morning for snacks because we are a deprived area. So, but the cost of that is going up. The only benefit that I will say is because I charge so little for my working parents because of the area I'm in.
Yes.
I charge them £7.50 an hour.
Right.
With the 2-year-old funding, I will get £12.
Okay.
So for me, all those parents that are already working and paying me, they've all applied for their codes. They will be guaranteed a space because they're already with me. But like you say, it's all those new parents that are applying.
Yeah, but they're being told it's free, so they're going to think they stop paying the £7.50.
Yeah, and they're only getting 15 hours, where a lot of them will need 30. So they will get 15 hours at the funded rate, which does benefit me. I'll give them that.
Okay.
But
and then another 15.
You've got to remember that they very quickly drop down to a 3-year-old, and it goes back to £6, and those children are still with us for that year.
It's a mess.
So there's a massive deficit.
How worried are you?
Very.
Right.
Very.
Put your worries into words.
This is the first year that I've been really concerned because I don't know that what we're going to get in is going to cover the cost of what goes out.
So extraordinarily, Rishi Sunak has introduced something which he will claim is designed to make your life better, and you think it's going to make your life worse.
Yeah, it's definitely not going to make it beneficial. It's not going to do anything. It's going to put more work on us because no one will know anything, and they're going to come to the nurseries and they're going to say, well, what's this? like they all do.
Wait there a second, because we're going to hang on. We're going to run out of time. I just need to check something with the producer. Have we got anyone who's happy with it? Have we got anyone who's rung in and said it's great? I can't wait. Roll on April. Jobs are good, and God bless Michael Gove. No, we love Rishi's. No, sorry, Joanne, carry on.
Yeah, well, no, I was just saying, it's not going to benefit anybody in the long run. And this, as I say, the 2-year-olds that are getting the funding and are already with me, that's fine. But next year there'll be twice as many, and we won't have the spaces because I run from September.
Right.
So my idea is that I fill up from September. So again, the times that they put it in, and what they don't explain to parents is if you apply too late, it doesn't happen that term, it happens the term after.
Which is going to put a big spanner in the plans of many. I've got to go. I seriously. Actually, before I do, can I ask you a rude question?
Go on.
Are you sure it's all right?
No, I don't know.
Do you make a decent living with 4 nurseries?
No. I'm struggling. Me and my co-partner are struggling. Right. I'm a single mum now, and I can just about afford to pay my bills. I don't drive.
No, fair enough. So, no, I didn't think you would because of the margins that you just described to me, or the margins that I just sort of filled in the gaps with. But that's not a helpful perception at all, I don't think, albeit it's one that's hard for parents to resist. Do you know they've put up some pictures of Jamie Bulger's killers on the same programmes, the same screens I was alluding to with the naming of Brianna Jai's killers, because it does somehow get burnt into the collective consciousness when child killers are named. But what purpose does it serve after this? 3 minutes after 11. If you want to avoid them, I don't think you're going to be able to. I speak of the faces of Brianna Jai's killer, the 16-year-old schoolgirl murdered in February of last year, almost a year ago to the day, and their names have been released, Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe. And their mugshots, which is, I think, the correct term to use, their mugshots will, I think, haunt the collective consciousness almost as much as those infamous mugshots of Venables and Thompson. Do you remember they're looking off, aren't they? These two are staring straight down the barrel of the camera. Venables and Thompson were both looking off to the left, I presume because they were considerably younger than Jenkinson and Ratcliffe, that there was some sort of distraction in place as to make sure they sat still while they had their photograph taken. But if I had any artistic talent whatsoever, that their faces are so imprinted upon my mind and my memory, I'd be able to draw them, and I suspect that these two will end up in a similar space. And I get instructions from various departments within LBC, which I usually completely ignore, but I get one today which says, can you let people know that the pictures are up on our website? And of course I will let you know that the pictures are up on our website. I will probably play you some footage shortly of Scarlett Jenkinson being arrested or being interviewed. I can't currently tell which from the angle at which I'm looking at it. The father of Brianna, the murdered schoolgirl, has said they are evil monsters who should not have been named. He says they're nothing. They should just be forgotten about. And it rather gives the lie. I can see Claire in Wimbledon waiting to speak to me to tell me it's provided closure for Brianna's parents. And it's no fault of your own, Claire, but her dad has just said that they shouldn't have been named. So that rather knocks that one off the table, doesn't it? And that's absolutely fine, because this is a conversation about confusion. Okay? The conversation we're about to have, it's a conversation about confusion. Why would you want to see their faces? What purpose does it serve? What appetite does it feed? I don't know. And yet, I'm not here to tell you that they shouldn't have been named. I don't know what purpose it serves. It feels a bit sort of 17th century, doesn't it? I read a lot of historical fiction, and increasingly I read the actual history books as well, from the sort of era where going to a public hanging was a jolly. It was a lovely day out. Going to a public hanging at Tyburn here in London was a wonderful way to while away a couple of hours. And that the casual barbarism, which saw people deported to Australia for stealing a loaf of bread, and just this idea that humanity or civilization is permanent is nonsense. It's always it's temporary and fragile. That the way in which we treat each other can revert always to the most primitive of instincts. And it feels to me like there's a slightly primitive instinct in play here, because I can't tell you. I don't know, because my screen's all popped up at the same time with these faces, and they're still here now, almost an hour later. It's the only story in town for TV, for visual media, who sort of have I don't think advantage is quite the right word, but obviously I can refer you to lbc.co.uk, but I can't show you the faces. And I think, crucially, I can't tell you why on earth I'd want to, and yet I feel that I should. It's a horrible story, which you probably don't need me to remind you much about. She was lured to a park near her home in Warrington, where she was stabbed 28 times in her head, neck and back. The court heard that the killers had been plotting and planning and swapping messages about what they intended to do, and now they have been named. You will never forget their names, I don't think. So I just noticed on the Sky News coverage there's a caption on one of the photographs saying "Do not use until approved." So there could be a sub-editor at Sky News who's potentially in a little bit of trouble there. But the dad is that both parents have been very powerful in their commemoration of their daughter and in their commentary on the case. And Peter Spooner, Brianna's dad, has said he's changed his mind on them being named. He said, "At first I thought they should be named. Why should they be protected? People should know who they are. Now I think their names are always going to be tied to Brianna's all the time. And I think they should just be forgotten about, locked up, and not be spoken about again. They're nothing." Now, I mention that because this is a conversation about confusion. And particularly on subjects like this, I worry about people who've got certainty. Is it Yeats? What's that line about the lack of certainty? I quoted it in one of my books. It's a wonderful line. Things fall apart. The centre cannot hold well, I say it'll come to me. I'll look it up if you haven't reminded me of it by the next junction. But the furious certainty, people who are certain about issues like this, when even the dad, even Brianna's father, has changed his mind. Sort of tub-thumping certainty on subjects like this. That's probably what I mean by primitive. But confusion sometimes is weakness, isn't it? Deciding clearly what is and what is not right is a crucial part of progress. I just don't know on this. So I would ask you a variety of questions, and you can answer any of them. The most obvious is, should they have been named and photographed like this? If not, why not? And if so, why? 0345 6060 973. The second question is, what is is fascination the right word? Is fascination the right word? Because the face of an adult killer would not attract anything like this level of interest or attention. I appreciate there's a debate prior to release regarding whether or not they will be released, whether or not they will be named and photographed. But I could not, with the possible exception of Peter Sutcliffe, Fred West and Harold Shipman, if I had a sort of magic memory where I could press a button on the side of my head and a picture of what I can picture in my brain came out, I'm not sure how many adult murderers I would be able to conjure up from the depths of my memory. But I could conjure up Mary Bell, and I could conjure up Myra Hindley. Child killers, both of them. But it's the killer that is the child that assumes a different resonance in our consciousness. And why? Probably because it flies in the face. Female killers are more notorious in some ways than male killers because it seems to fly in the face of our presumptions about gender roles. And then child killers, children that kill, seem to defy all of our expectations and presumptions about society. Why? So we do the traditional phone-in that everybody else will do, which is should they have been named or not? And I don't mean that as a criticism. It's an interesting question, but it's not, in my humble, it's not the most interesting question necessarily thrown up by this story. But I do want to hear your thoughts on that. 0345 60 60 973. And in a sense, the third question, speaks to the first one, doesn't it? What purpose does it serve? So you've got a visceral reaction, right? First off, straight off the bat. Or like me, and Brianna's dad. You don't know really. You're changing your mind. You know now what you think, but you thought something different yesterday. So should these two people have been named and had their pictures released? Yes, they bloody well should, James. No, they really shouldn't. So you've got that. That's your first position or first constituency of people that you might be in. I don't think I am. I'm in the middle one. I don't know what I think about this. I don't know what I think. And in order to know what to think, I need to know what purpose you think it serves. And if I find your arguments unpersuasive, then I could come down on the side of Brianna's dad and say they should not have been named. What does it serve? What purpose does it serve? If it's to do with public appetite for pillory, if it speaks to something similar to the impulse that brought people in Queen Elizabeth's reign to Tyburn to watch criminals guilty sometimes of relatively petty crimes being hanged by the neck until they were dead, if it speaks to something similar to that, then I want no part of it. I want no part of it. But if the purpose it serves is more sophisticated, if the purpose it serves is more civilized, then I am very much open to persuasion. So what purpose does it serve? And with that in mind, should it have happened? 0345 6060 973. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. And I am allegedly a journalist of sorts, and my job is to provide you with, for want of a better phrase, compelling content. And therefore, when I tell you that we will be sharing some audio of some of the killers' conversations with police, do I become part of the problem? Am I appealing to something that I've just compared to almost a bloodlust? I told you I was confused, and I think you probably should be too. Either way, if you hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It's Ian Huntley, says William, who always sticks in my mind. Again, a child killer. And we shouldn't remember him. We should remember the little girls. Holly and Jessica, I remember their names. But I suspect that in almost all of these cases, with the possible exception of Jamie Bulger, the full names of the killers are easier to recall than the full names of the killed. Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. It's 11:15. 18 minutes after 11 is the time. Let's crack on. It's a phrase I haven't come across before. We should learn from America, where the consequences of naming and faming child killers are well documented. People assume a sort of grisly celebrity. I don't know that is a problem on this side of the pond, actually, but who knows? What's the purpose? What purpose is served by naming today Mrs. Justice Yip taking the decision to name Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe as the teenagers who murdered the teenager, Brianna Guy? Sarah is in Reading. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Hello. Well, I've actually been to prison myself as an inmate, and I also now work for a company where we help rehabilitate women once they get released from prison.
Okay.
I do really strongly believe in rehabilitation. I've been able to be rehabilitated, albeit I didn't commit a heinous crime. No one was harmed or anything like that.
Okay.
However, I do feel that they need to be named and shamed, and their pictures do need to be out there. Because what happens when someone goes into prison, and I know this about people who I met personally, spoke to personally, who'd committed horrible murders. I met them at the end of their sentence sometimes when they'd actually been then released to open prison. So when I moved from one of the most dangerous prisons for women in the UK and then moved to open prison, I met a lot of people who'd started their sentences in the 90s, and now they're at the end of it, and they were going out to work. They were working in some of our supermarkets. They were working at, places that we...
Yes, but that's what the parole board is for, isn't it? To decide whether or not they still pose a risk. And when the parole board makes mistakes, which they do because they're not clairvoyant, then the world goes nuts. And you're describing adults. There's a reason why the law has the capacity in the case of under 18s not to name defendants, victims or witnesses. And it's normal that they're kept secret so that they're not stigmatised for the rest of their lives. I'm comfortable with these two being stigmatised for the rest of their lives, but what purpose does it serve?
Well, I don't think that in this specific case, I wouldn't say that for everybody, because I did meet some people who committed horrible murders when they were younger, and, you know, they've really turned their lives around. They take full responsibility. They're completely different people.
But what purpose does it serve, naming these two? What purpose does it serve? That's all I'm asking.
I think the purpose it serves, I don't think they deserve to ever live a normal life.
So it makes you feel better?
I don't think it makes me feel better, but I think what it does is it prevents them from going on to live a normal life. They do not deserve that privilege. Yeah. They don't. And I think that
But they'd be released under new identities anyway, won't they?
Of course, they'll be released with new names, and they may look a bit different.
I'm not even sure they'll ever be released. That will depend on assessments and, of course, on parole hearings decades hence. But so you want the new identities that they will be given to be vulnerable to exposure, is what you're saying.
Not their names, but their faces.
Yes, that's what I mean. That's identity, pictures. The new identity that they're given to protect them and also to protect other members of the public, in a sense, from committing crimes against them. You almost want to scupper that before it's even started, don't you?
I don't believe they even deserve that protection. What they did to that girl was horrible.
Yes, they'll get it. I think it's disgusting, utterly indefensible, but I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in what purpose you think it serves. And the answer is that you think it will go further than the justice system allows, and it will mean that they face attack or abuse in the unlikely event.
I don't want them to be attacked. Or
what do you mean by a normal life, then? When you say you don't want them to have a normal life, what do you want them to happen to them that wouldn't happen to people leading a normal life?
I think they should be ostracised. I think they should struggle finding work. I think they should just struggle. I want them to struggle.
But they won't, will they? Because they've got new identities.
I think they still will struggle. As a person who's been through a similar experience of going into prison, coming out, and I didn't commit any heinous crime, but I struggled myself. I work with women daily who
I'm not getting it. I can absorb your feelings. I can understand your feelings, but I don't think either of us are quite putting into words. You just want them to be punished more.
I do. I think their punishment should never end. They should suffer.
No, I get that. That's fine. I get that, and that is, you know, it's about your appetites, really, as much as it is about anything else. In terms of what purpose would it serve, the judge can't say, I don't think, I'm doing this because I want to make their lives even worse than they're going to be already. But that's what a lot of people are taking away from it. I'd stress again that his dad, her dad, Brianna's dad, doesn't want his daughter's killers to be named. 23 after 11 is the time. Joe's in Nottingham. Joe, what would you like to say?
I don't think we should have released it. If you look at historical serial killers, and this girl had an obsession with serial killers. That was made quite clear. And one of the big things serial killers is getting their name out.
Yes.
And all we've done is given her the satisfaction of becoming infamous. Everyone will remember her name. Everyone will remember his name. Give it 10, 20 years, will people still remember the victims' names?
I hope so, but it's not certain. I can't name Mary Bell's victims. I can name John Venables and Robert Thompson's. I can name Ian Huntley's, but at time I can name some of Hindley and Brady's, but not all of them. Why is that important? I know it is, but I want it in your words.
I don't think we should given her the satisfaction, really. They've made it clear that she's going to be in prison probably for the rest of her life, and now she has that sick satisfaction of becoming infamous and her name being out there, her name being associated with other killers.
And how do you respond to this line, which is very powerful? And I'm not setting you up in a sort of toe-to-toe rhetorical battle with Brianna's dad, but I think it's fair to ask you. At first, I thought they should be named, but why should they be protected? That was he initially thought. People should know who they are. Now I think
I thought the same, to be honest, when it first happened. But then, after further thinking about it,
Well, the key question is what purpose does it serve? And I thought Sarah was very honest and fairly close to saying it makes me feel better. That's the purpose that it serves. I don't know if that's the role of the criminal justice system. Thank you, Joe. On a rather lighter note, I'm in Nottingham tomorrow. Any recommendations?
Oh, what for? Food or?
Well, whatever you fancy.
Oh, if you're going for food, Miss Korea or Sushi Mania is my favourite.
There you go. I should be there in time for an early supper before hitting the stage. 25 minutes after 11 is the time. And Alex is in Camden. Alex, what would you like to say?
Hiya, James. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome.
I wanted to say I don't think that the kids should have been named or had their pictures posted online. I completely agree with you. I think it's like medieval punishment almost. That
wasn't my position. That was me thinking out loud because I am genuinely confused. That's why I find the contributions of the father so compelling, because you're not often allowed to change your mind in public in this country. But no one's going to criticize. No one's going to criticize him for doing so. But it does. It reminds me. It has echoes for me of pillory, of public pillory, which was all about pleasing the people watching rather than having any meaningful impact upon the people being watched.
Exactly. I think that's the crux of the issue. I mean, you do think, what purpose does it serve? Well, we want justice, obviously, when something like this happens, but I don't believe that the incident is isolated. I don't believe that this is just an issue of two evil people. I think this is part of a wider problem. And instead of talking about, glamorization of serial killers in the media, which causes, children to have these sorts of...
What can you do about that, though?
Well, I think that's the conversation we should be having instead of...
it's a tough one, though, isn't it? It's like a bit like conversations we've had when we wonder how much oxygen you should give to something that you find fairly repellent. Is the only people who really understand the glamorization of serial killers are people who've been exposed to the glamorization of serial killers. Most of us don't pick those books off the shelves or go to those websites or look at those.
No, but it is quite prolific on social media, especially for Gen Z.
Is it?
Stuff like TikTok. Yeah. I mean, I'm Gen Z myself, and I don't follow a lot of that kind of content, but it comes up on my For You pages anyway.
And it literally, I mean, it's probably more American than British, but it treats these people, presumably there's a bit of an incel thing going on. There's been a couple of incel-inspired school shootings, haven't there? And trying to turn these people into heroes because you somehow share some of the grievances that they claimed they were airing when they committed their crimes.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about far-right views becoming more popular among Gen Z.
Yeah, we do.
And I think media has a lot to play in that. They're 16, 15, 16. They're really impressionable at that age.
And what they are being exposed to is at the moment utterly uncontrolled, and some argue utterly uncontrollable. On a much lighter note, can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
Is it always Gen Z? Because I've always said Generation Z. Does that make me sound like a fogey?
I'm not sure. I suppose that's also to do with...
But you've never heard of transatlantic osmosis, but you've never heard anyone say Generation Z in your normal life?
No, I don't think I have.
Oh, Lord, it's something else that I've been getting wrong over all day. I need some advice on this. 28 minutes after 11 is the time. I'm still looking at these two faces, Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe, and the more I look at them, the more that sense grows that this is not about their punishment. It's about how we feel. It was the media that applied for the names, I think. They wouldn't necessarily be released unless the media had asked them to. I think the media always asks in these sorts of cases, but the decision to name them is taken by the judge. In this case, Mrs. Justice Yip. It normally runs out at adulthood, so it would run out eventually anyway, which actually is a point I should have made to Sarah, who worries about them being unidentifiable upon their release. But normally at adulthood, this would run out. So they might be released with new names, but their faces would be in the public domain. Their old faces, their old names would be in the public domain. And that, I think that question's getting bigger the more we talk about it, actually, is what purpose does it serve? You sit there and think that is the right thing to do, but you don't say why. And that's really where this programme lives. It lives in the why. What is your opinion? Fascinating. Now, why do you hold it? Why do you hold it? What is your opinion? They should be named, but why? And quite often we have very, very strong opinions. And when we're asked why we hold them, we don't know. What purpose does this serve? 0345 6060 973. Lottie Morley's here now with your headlines. 11:34. It's good to be confused, I think. And that line from Yeats that I couldn't remember earlier, the best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Passionate intensity, or what I'd call sort of violent certainty. Absolutely 100% clear that this is terrible. Why? Don't know. It just is. And that's where the mad stuff comes in, isn't it? If you're talking about politics, I passionately believe that immigration is bad. Why? Well, there's a bloke, this scumbag who's committed an acid attack was an immigrant. That's absolutely no bearing whatsoever on whether immigration in general is good or bad. You might as well say he got born, therefore being born is bad, or he's a Capricorn, therefore Capricorns should all be deported. It's just ridiculous, but it's passionate intensity, isn't it? And Brianna's mum, Esther, has said, again, not equivocal by any stretch of the... Actually, you can hear what she says on the subject. So you know that Brianna's dad has said, I wish they hadn't been named, because it gives them profile, in a sense, to paraphrase his words. Here's Brianna's mum, Esther.
When the verdict came through, I saw how devastated the mum was, one of the mums were, and it kind of made me feel that that's how I felt when I found out the news about Brianna. Because it is true that we've all lost our children. I think that if they weren't named, it's just a delay in the inevitable. They're going to be named when they're 18. If they're named now, then that's going to get, it will get it out of the way. It will get the attention over with, and then hopefully we can focus on something more positive, like the campaign.
It does. If anything breaks my heart about stories like this, it's the way that the families of the victims have their wishes stolen by the mob. I remember there was a murder not far from where I now live, and the family of the murdered schoolgirl begged almost in public, certainly her sister begged in public for racists not to make anything of the fact that the murderer was an Eastern European immigrant. This was back when Eastern European immigrants were public enemy number one. And of course, it didn't stop anybody from trying to make political capital over the ethnicity or the immigration status of the murderer, the man who killed Alice Gross. I remember Alice's name. It took me a moment and happily I don't remember the name of her killer. So it's a strange old business. But I really feel that. I really feel when families sit there. You have Brianna's mum there calling for positive reactions. A lot of bereaved parents find enormous comfort in trying to help others. I spoke to one yesterday who was bereaved in incredibly different circumstances from Esther and from Brianna's dad, but they do find enormous comfort in trying to help others, which is, I suppose, a silver lining of humanity in a story that often seems to be pointing to the complete absence of humanity. But the question of what purpose does it serve has not yet been answered to in a way that makes me think it is the right thing to do. I started today's programme by advising you to read something in the Daily Mail, which I don't think I've ever done before, so I'll defend them again from this text that's coming. It'll sell a few copies of the Daily Mail tomorrow. It'll sell a few copies of every newspaper. It'll drive traffic towards the LBC website. I mean, I can't get on the moral high ground about this one by any stretch of the imagination. So it's not just that. But for normal people not in the industry, what purpose does it serve? And that's sadly, tragically, I think Esther's wrong. I don't think it gets it out of the way at all. I just think it starts the madness earlier. There's no way these faces will be forgotten or these names will be forgotten by the time they turn 18. Richard's in Bishop Stortford. Richard, what would you like to say?
Thank you for taking my call, James. One purpose I think it could serve is we don't know what other heinous crimes potentially have been committed. And maybe a victim or a witness, if they were involved or bodies two may come forward. And that's one purpose it could serve. It's not a plausible purpose in this case. It is obviously in some, particularly when things are still at the accused. They call it shaking the tree, don't they? But I don't know how closely you followed the case. There was quite a lot of coverage of other plans and other people that they had targeted who were deliberately not named by court. They received the protection of the court in those circumstances. But I don't think it holds in this case. But it would be a point in normal cases, I suppose, where the killers aren't children. I understand, but I mean, James Bulger's killers were a lot younger than these two. Yes. And you can see where I'm going with this, and potentially, it may trigger some memory. I'm not saying that that's the only reason, but it's a potential reason that... I can't really see where you're going with it. The only thing we found out when James Bulger's killers' identities were made public was how utterly awful, certainly in one case, their home lives had been, and how feral almost their childhoods had been. But no, I think with adults, perhaps shaking the tree, it's a tricky one, isn't it? And then of course you open the door to people coming forward with false accusations, which can have all manner of ramifications. Although remains a kind of necessary evil in the criminal justice system. You can't take accusations that are true seriously if you don't take all accusations seriously. But I don't think anybody except you, and you're perfectly entitled to do so, I don't think anybody is claiming, up to and including the police, that releasing their identity would bring forward other crimes or help to solve other crimes. If the police thought that was possible, I'm sure they would have said so. Buffy's in Bude, or Bude. Buffy, what would you like to say? And have you killed any vampires lately? You've never had that. You've never had that joke before, have you? What would you like to say?
I think we need to look at this another way.
Go on.
I can see that the kind of knee-jerk reaction is, and it's also people's morbid fascination. Yes. With what does someone look like that a teenager that kills a teenager? Well, they probably look like teenagers. Yes. But
they do, right? I mean, that's the thing that jumps out at you, is that they do just look like teenagers. There's no sort of mark of Cain on their foreheads or anything like that.
No, exactly. And from the flip side of this is, I thought you were a child, really, and weren't you protected until you were 18? And bearing that in mind, these... we don't know. Is it nature? Is it nurture that they're like this? Can't these children be rehabilitated? Are they psychopaths? But
there'll be psychological assessments throughout their imprisonment, and if they are deemed to be any of the above, then that impacts upon their parole hearings and the likelihood of release. I think the population probably divides into people who believe in rehabilitation and people who don't. And then it probably divides among people who do believe in rehabilitation. It probably divides into people who think it's always possible and people who think that it is sometimes impossible. And that's why criminal justice is complicated. It's why tabloid attacks upon judges and juries are so unhelpful, because they come from a very different place to contemplation of all the available evidence, don't they?
But they're still children.
Well, they are still children. Well, they're 16. They were 15 when they did it. So, yes, technically they were children. They wouldn't be allowed to get married.
I'm sure you've got 16. One of yours must be about 16 now. You know what their brains are like.
Well, I do, but I'm fairly confident they're not going to be getting involved in any murders anytime soon, Buffy.
No. I know. It just seems...
What purpose do you think it serves? What purpose... When you hear other people saying they want it to be done, what do you think they're really saying? They want it to be...
They want it to be what? Show their photos?
Yeah, why? Why do people want it? Why is that?
Because it's a morbid fascination.
Which we've all got. We've all got to varying degrees, I suppose. But it's not a very... It's not a very uplifting analysis or a very comprehensive analysis of the purpose that it serves. It feeds our morbid fascination. It's a great phrase, actually, and it fits with my slightly clumsy references to Tudor times, and public hangings. It's a morbid fascination, and that isn't necessarily a reason to deprive two people of whatever it is they're being deprived of, the chance of a full rehabilitation. The problem is that even the biggest bleeding heart in the world is going to struggle to make a very powerful, or I would certainly, and I'm a fairly big bleeding heart, I'm not going to make a very powerful argument to show these two people any sort of compassion or understanding at all. Right? The crime they've committed is one of those crimes that makes us question almost everything we think we know about each other. It's unutterably disgusting. But then you hear Brianna's incredibly dignified mother talking about seeing the mother of one of her girl's killers. The devastation at the moment that the verdict dropped, and having the emotional literacy and the emotional generosity to see in that devastated mother a reflection of her own devastation. That's extraordinary. That's humanity in its purest form. Oh, it's empathy in its purest form. I don't know that you'd be capable of that. I don't know that I'd be capable of that. I don't even know if Buffy's brought my own children into it, and of course that conjures up thoughts from both sides of the courtroom, and I don't even know if I'd want to be capable of empathy if I was sitting in Brianna's mother's shoes. But imagine for a moment the emotional strength and the basic human kindness of a woman looking at her baby's killer, her baby's killer's mother, and seeing a reflection of her own devastation, because their children have both been taken away from them forever in very different ways. I think that's extraordinary, actually, and I hadn't picked up on it before. I think we'd probably listen to it again, just to almost register the dignity with which Esther has conducted herself there. On a rather lighter note, I can tell you that LBC's ace reporter Henry Riley he's becoming a bit like a dog with a bone when it comes to that business that calls itself a political party that's presided over by the lad that was in Lewis but wasn't Lewis, the one that got himself into all sorts of trouble in the libel courts last week, and it's fair to say hasn't necessarily demonstrated much appetite for reflection or repentance since. But Henry Riley has been looking further into this outfit called Reclaim, which presents itself or identifies as a political party. And I could tell you straight, I've been doing this job for 20 years, and even I am a little, what would the word be? Amused, stroke shocked by what Henry has unearthed. More on that after this. It's 10 to 12, you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Listen, in the highly unlikely event that 15 hours a week of me, plus the podcast, the Full Disclosure podcast, which is an absolute peach this week, actually, with Dame Sheila Hancock, who you meet people sometimes. One of the only problems with Full Disclosure, and I've only ever done one interview that I was disappointed by, and I'm never ever going to tell you who it is, unless you come to my live shows, actually, where sometimes I may be tempted into letting the cat out of the bag. But speaking of my live shows, in the highly unlikely event that 15 hours of me a week plus Full Disclosure is not enough, I think there are still some tickets available for my gig in Wolverhampton tonight, where we will be celebrating the fact that some 3.5 months after release, How They Broke Britain is still set to be in the Sunday Times top 10 on Sunday. This despite the fact that the Sunday Times has contrived to completely ignore the book, possibly because it features an entire chapter about Rupert Murdoch and many of his senior lieutenants. But it's at the Wolfram Halls. If you don't fancy coming to see me, then the Wolverhampton Literary Festival has all manner of delights and treats lined up for you. So just go and check out their website. But I think certainly yesterday there were a few tickets left, and you could get your hands on one, and then you could see me for 18 hours in a single week. 11:50, what a terrifying thought. Henry Riley is here to rein in my ego. Henry, what have you been up to?
Well, James, I have been looking into the Reclaim Party. That's the party led...
Can I stop you there? Is it a party in a conventional sense?
Perhaps unconventional, but it is a registered party with the Electoral Commission, which stands for election. And I've been speaking with two insiders, James, who've been speaking with me anonymously. They are both, important to make the point, no longer within the party. They've both left. But I've been looking into some of the claims we've spoken about before. Now, Just to set up, because we've often spoken about the Reclaim Party, exactly who they are. So, founded by Laurence Fox, after that Question Time appearance with Jeremy Hosking backing it, Sir Jeremy Hosking. He's the businessman. He's previously donated to the Conservative Party.
And to the Brexit Party.
They've had some electoral tests so far, haven't gone particularly well. So Laurence Fox stood for Mayor of London in 2021. That is an expensive deposit, £10,000 you have to put down if you're standing for Mayor of London.
It's a drop in the ocean compared to the average legal fees for people who lose libel cases.
I suppose compared to that it might be, yes. You have to get 5% to keep your deposit. He got 1.9%.
Well, to be fair, we don't know what the aim was.
That's true.
That could have been the original objective, 1.9%.
Although that same year they stood in Glasgow Pollock, the Scottish parliamentary election, and came 18th with 0.3% of the vote, where Leo Kearse lost his £500 deposit. And then the other test since then, Martin Daubney, who is curiously no longer with the party. That's
Chapman. I only know these people because they appear on these television stations, and then there are clips of them making absolute fools of themselves. He's the bloke that was required to deal with some live developments in the case of the absconding prisoner, and he just sort of he just starts shouting random syllables. I'm not sure that some of them are even. Is that him?
That he was, when Daniel Khalif was
someone told me he
found.
was in Nigel Farage's Brexit Party as well.
No, well, he might be now, but
he
was.
No, he was.
He was.
Yes.
Oh, no, sorry, he was in the original Brexit Party.
So many of these people. It's like an infernal generation game conveyor belt, where once you had teasemaids and cuddly toys, now you've just got weirdo after idiot after weirdo. Cute. Anyway, sorry, I interrupted.
Well,
he's a Chip Chapman, cancel, hostage, me.
Yes, so he was on TV.
You must watch that clip if you haven't seen it. It's broadcasting history.
So he was on TV when Daniel Khalif was found, the man who obviously escaped from Wandsworth Prison. He also lost as well. He stood in the North Shropshire by-election and got less than 1% of the vote. So it's fair to say it hasn't been a sort of enormous success electorally for the Reclaim Party.
No, but from little acorns.
Far.
From little acorns can grow mighty oaks.
When Laurence Fox has indicated he's going to stand again for Mayor of London
there you go.
At some point. So
excellent news.
So perhaps this year. But
unless he's busy acting.
Could be. To run you through some of these quotes, James, and I'll stress again, these are not my words. These are words from someone who was in the Reclaim Party, two people. The man's a nutter. He's a walking, dangerous ego. Now, they've described what a regular day of...
Are you sure that wasn't Keith talking about me?
Yes, no, I'm sure.
Okay,
I'm sure.
Just checking.
This is a sort of daily life in the Reclaim Party where they claim, and again, this is a claim, that Laurence Fox had a woeful work ethic. And they back that up by saying he used to stroll in late every day at 11 a.m. He would then go for what they described as a long lunch at 12:30, followed by a nap, sometimes in the office because he was so worn out. They describe his work ethic as a joke. They also describe meetings in a far from flattering way. You can read more online in terms of that. I can't quite say it on the radio, but it will be on lbc.co.uk.
Not least because it would be me that got the Ofcom complaint, not you.
Yes, that's true. And also, we've spoken about in the past, James, the Reclaim Party having no members. This has been confirmed by my source, who says there is no one actually able to join the party. Right. You can sign up for a mailing list. Currently, though, Reclaim has no members. Now, further revelations we found. We've spoken in the past, James, about Andrew Bridgen, who was very briefly, for just over 6 months, an MP with the Reclaim Party. Yes. I've found that there were some tensions between Laurence Fox and Andrew Bridgen. My source told me he rarely went to Leicestershire. This is Laurence Fox going to Leicestershire, where Andrew Bridgen is the MP, because he didn't see it as a sexy seat. They said that Laurence Fox was also jealous of Andrew Bridgen and realised that he was getting a lot of the airtime.
All right, listen, I'm no fan of the fella, but no one could be jealous of Andrew Bridgen.
Well, this source claims that Laurence Fox was. He was very jealous. They then said Laurence couldn't
Mary Joseph and the little donkey. Well, jealous of Andrew Bridgen?
It gets worse.
That's a medical condition. Surely.
They said he couldn't, so he effectively couldn't be bothered to go and campaign. There was a tension, the relationship began to sour, and then we had two incidents that sent Andrew Bridgen over the edge, I'm told.
Oh, Lord.
Firstly was a Christmas card. So the Reclaim Party, the MPs often send Christmas cards to their constituents, and they spelt Andrew Bridgen's name wrong.
How did they spell it?
Andrew Brigden. I'm not sure if that was deliberate or not.
Well, God.
Andrew Bridgen was reported to be royally something off when he read his Christmas card to constituents in northwest Leicestershire. Something we've also spoken about, James, is this row over a company car. Now, I was determined to find out more details about this.
I said you were like a dog with a bone, Henry.
I was like it, yes. Better than my exclusive yesterday with regards to Richard Walker's pen that you
please share that with the
referenced on Twitter. Well, I found out that Richard Walker, who defected from the Conservatives to Labour, lost his Parker pen at the Labour Business Conference. Which I suppose hardly
it's like Woodward and Bernstein
Pulitzer-winning journalism. But it was a Volvo XC90 in this case. Nice. It was a company car that was in Lawrence Fox's name. Andrew Bridgen then asked Lawrence Fox and the hierarchy at the party whether he could borrow it for constituency work. Oh, yeah. Lawrence Fox, I'm told, got bored and wanted to use the car earlier than agreed. You asked me about the Christmas tree last time, James.
I did, yes.
It was a personal Christmas tree, so it wasn't going up at the Reclaim Party headquarters. I'm told it was for Lawrence Fox's personal use for his address, I assume. Then, when Andrew Bridgen refused to give the car back, I'm told that Lawrence Fox threatened him with police action. Mm-hmm. There is another incident, though, which upset many people within the Reclaim Party, and again, this has come from two members of the party.
How much more is there?
This involves a MacBook Air. So I'm told there was a producer at the party who used to edit videos for the party, put up sort of campaign videos. They weren't paid particularly well, in the words of this person I was speaking with, and so they had to commute from, let's say, a town in the south, and so it was quite a commute every day, but also crucially quite expensive coming back and forth to edit videos. There was an agreement reached with the party hierarchy that we need to buy this trainee, this producer,
young fella,
a top-of-the-range MacBook so he can edit from home so he doesn't have to do this commute every day. I'm then told that MacBook was left on a desk at the Reclaim Party headquarters. Lawrence Fox got wind of that, came in, asked who it was for. They explained it's for this man who's putting up all of your videos. Lawrence Fox then took the MacBook and said, I'm afraid I don't have a MacBook. I'm taking that. It's mine, thank you. I fancy having that, were the exact words that he's reported to have said. And then
you've got two deep throats on this.
There's I don't really know how to respond to that. But there's
comparing your journalism to the Watergate.
Yes,
scandal.
Thank you. Yes,
very welcome.
This is probably slightly better than the Richard Walker story. But
the case of the disappearing pen.
The case of the disappearing pen.
What if? I mean, I appreciate that the party has no members, but if other people on board wanted to perhaps replace the leader, how would they go about doing that?
Again, no formal mechanism to replace the leader. This is actually something that's very similar to the Reform Party,
I get them mixed up.
This is the one that Nigel Farage is the honorary president of,
right?
Formerly the Brexit Party, led by Richard Tice.
That's a business, again, but also registered as a political party.
Well,
but you can't get rid of Richard Tice.
Not formally, no, because there's a board of directors rather than a party membership that can depose the leader.
Oh, thank you.
But with Lawrence Fox's party, again, Reclaim, I'm told there's actually no formal way to replace Lawrence Fox unless, of course, the man who runs it, Jeremy Hosking, or someone else, were to dispose of the party or were to
get bored of well, I think Marina Hyde in The Guardian put it best, to get bored of bankrolling one expletives breakdown. But who knows what? Do we know what motivates Jeremy Hosking? Did either of your deep throats give you an insight into why anybody would want to be financially responsible for one of the biggest skip fires in the history of British politics?
Well, they did. They said, and the sort of analogy that they put to me is that Jeremy Hosking very much saw Lawrence Fox as a sort of naughty schoolboy, a naughty schoolchild, and liked that he was upsetting the apple cart, liked that he was saying the unsayable, and suggested that despite the apparent lack of electoral success, he was making enough noise to make that sort of worthwhile.
Okay. And that is where we are, really. So with no reason to expect that Jeremy Hosking, I'd give you Marina Hyde's brilliant description. Who is this backroom man lavishly funding one bleep's extended breakdown as part of a campaign to buy his way to political and cultural influence at the same time as bleating publicly about the state of our democracy? Because much frivolity though I may have had in the last 10 minutes, Henry, that there is actually a serious subtext to this in terms of its democratic implications and what it says about our political system, but no sign yet that he may have got bored in lavishly funding one Plum's extended breakdown.
Well, there are whispers, because if you look at Lawrence Fox's Twitter, he has alluded to the fact that...
really not going
to
do
well,
that.
I have. I've done it so you don't have to. Yes. He's alluded to the fact that other parties, other similar parties, by which I assume he might mean the SDP, UKIP, Reform. I won't go through the whole list, but the other similar parties.
The Judean People's Front, the People's Front of Judea,
have been approaching Jeremy Hosking about funding, or approaching reclaimed donors, which you could fairly assume meant Jeremy Hosking. So there's a suggestion that other parties are reaching out to Mr. Hosking. However, as it stands, Lawrence Fox still planning to run for Mayor of London. If you look at his Twitter, certainly weighing it up. Just to make the point as well, James, we did put all of these points to the Reclaim Party, who did not respond to any of our requests.
I'm struck by the libel case last week, which you haven't touched on, but which he lost in quite spectacular fashion, and that it was claimed there that his acting career was over. I think he claimed that as part of his case. So if it does transpire that his political career may be heading in a similar direction, I suppose he'll have to fall back on the music.
They have put something in the water. They seek a cure for the conversation. They stole a march on your indecision.
It's 12:03. 6 minutes after 12 is the time, and from the sublimely ridiculous back to the deadly serious. One or two more calls on the decision by the judge in the case to reveal the identities of Brianna Jai's killers. Brianna, of course, killed a year ago by two people who were then 15, two people whose names we now know, Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe. And I think that my contention that the issue was not quite as black and white as many would allow has been, I think it's been vindicated, because it is actually a heck of a lot more confusing than you might first think, as is evinced probably most effectively by the fact that Brianna's dad, John Spooner, had originally wanted them to be named and then decided that he didn't. 7 minutes after 12 is the time, and I think it's that pivot that Kelvin in Northwich found particularly poignant, isn't it, Kelvin? Why did you pick up the phone?
Well, I've come off the motorway to talk to you, James, because I was listening to your conversation, and well, firstly, yeah, much love and empathy to Brianna's family, because we've sort of been there. My mother was murdered 14 years ago now, very horrifically. A lot of parallels to poor Brianna.
Right.
As I was saying to your researcher, your producer before, initially, I wanted her killer named. I wanted his picture on the paper. I wanted people to know what he'd done. And it wasn't even retribution, because I trust our court system, I trust our judicial system. It was that what he did to my mother was horrific. It doesn't make good daytime radio.
Okay.
But you're sat in the family part of the courts with a couple of really nice police support people.
Yes.
And behind you are his family friends, people who were character witnesses. And over the 5 days of the murder trial, they just disappeared. Yeah, it became unequivocal.
So as the evidence emerged, his supporters peeled away.
Yeah, they couldn't look you in the eye.
Wow.
We had members of the jury sobbing. Nobody should go through that.
No.
But thanks to our wonderful UK press, they picked up on some stupid little details of the trial, and it became focused on World Championship bridge player and utter nonsense that didn't reflect what had happened. And I thought, there are people who've chosen to be character witnesses there are people walking around in the world who possibly question that, because they're not going to see this, because the papers can't report this sort of thing. And I've got to say, at the time, I wanted people to know. But now, a lot of healing later, and it was very complicated post-trial.
I'm sure.
Now, as your research has just done really quickly, you put my mum's name into a search engine, you put my name into a search engine, and that's what comes up. It's a picture of him. You might find a couple of lovely pictures of my mum that would initially make me smile, but right next to them is a picture of him. And I think, actually, despite all of that, I'm not a fan of the death penalty. I'm not particularly about retribution, but I don't want him, and I don't want Brianna's killers to have any aspect of what Brianna or my mum now don't have, be that notoriety, existence, being there in the world. any of that. And yeah, if I could make those pictures of him in the headlines, and it's a bit different because he's an adult.
Sure.
If I could make those disappear, I absolutely would.
Because your mum is defined in death for the stranger, for the public, not for you or your family or for the people that knew her, but for the rest of us. She's defined in death by him.
Yeah, exactly that. Everything that's going to come up has his name on it, not my mum's. We buried my mum without a surname on her grave. That's a really odd thing to do.
Yes, it is.
To break that link, if that makes sense. So,
mate, it makes perfect sense, Kelvin. Absolutely perfect sense. I can't obviously imagine what it was like, or what it's like for you today to be hearing all of the echoes that you hear as this case is necessarily and correctly covered in quite a lot of detail. And you're right, Roxy's passed me the details of your mum's case, and that there are some very chilling echoes of that crime as well. When did you begin to shift? When did your position begin to shift? Because I think the plausibility issue is probably key as well. I don't think it's plausible to keep this stuff out of the public eye, particularly with adults. And the judge in this case, I think, will have concluded that it's going to come out when they're 18, so there's not much point trying to keep a lid on it until then. So while it might not be plausible publicly, crikey, you've expressed quite perfectly why it would be desirable privately. Can you remember when you began to feel your feelings shift?
So I should say, I personally had a very protracted experience afterwards. I ended up locked in civil and chancery court with him for another 5 years. So I probably haven't followed a normal grieving process.
No, because it's all on hold until that's resolved.
Yeah, and that went on for nearly 5 years.
Oh, God.
Yeah. So probably a decade. It probably took me a decade, in fact 5 years after that. I am one of those people that's contacted Google and got them to break the links with my name, but every time somebody looks, like today, those links are reinforced.
Is that how it works? That's how it works. So you can't.
They can kill it at a moment in time.
Yes.
Incredibly, they can't break those links to my mum because she's not there to make that request. So yeah, for me, it took a long time. I think it's immensely brave and right of Brianna's parents, or father at least, to have spotted that now. And that is the right way to honour their daughter, I think. And I know you're doing it, James. I'm not. I don't want to sound like I'm really down on the press.
No, you can.
But I think every time those killers' names are mentioned, it should be prefaced with her name.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I'll do that.
That's the person that matters.
I'll do that for you and your mum every time if we do it on this programme, every single time.
Yeah,
They don't. It's Brianna
need,
Jai's story, isn't it?
Yeah, they don't need to be known as anything other than the people that killed her. They don't need a name in the world. They don't need a place in the world. So, yeah.
Thank you, man. That's an incredible insight, and one that obviously I wish you weren't in such a powerful position to deliver. But you have. I mean, you have grieved now. You sound as if you have come to terms with elements of what happened to you and what happened to your mum.
Yeah, I mean, there's a thing called the Kubler-Ross grief cycle that counsellors might tell you about. It took a long time for acceptance to arrive, but I think I'm there now.
Good man. I'm glad to hear it. I'm sorry I disrupted your morning in such a potentially traumatic way, Kelvin.
Well, yeah, I think some things touch your nerve, don't they? And yeah, I started with it and I want to finish with it. There's no way you can get into their world, but much love and empathy for Brianna's parents today and moving forward.
Beautifully put from someone who will know a hell of a lot more than most of us about what they are going through. Kelvin, thank you. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The time now is 12:15. It is 18 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm sure that the naming and sentencing of Brianna Jai's killers, as I think I'll refer to them from now on this programme, not least having listened to Kelvin a few moments ago. I don't know. I didn't check with him, but I took the decision not to reference his story or the names of his mother and her killer as well for similar reasons. I don't know whether that was the right thing to do or not, but I do know that he would want us to refer to Brianna Ghey and her killers henceforth, and that's something that we can very easily do. 18 minutes after 12 is the time. And now, as Monty Python once said, for something completely different. Oddly, I can draw a parallel between the two issues, even though one appears at first glance to be much more light-hearted. But it's about, that I'm fascinated by what happens after the knee-jerk reaction, don't you, by now? And hopefully, if you're still listening to this programme, you have become fascinated by that as well. The knee-jerk reaction is such a simple human thing, but it is very rarely reliable or rational, the knee-jerk reaction. And of course, some of us are conditioned throughout our lives to then furiously defend the knee-jerk reaction. I think it causes more conflict and upset than almost anything else over which we have actually got quite a lot of control. If we found it easier to climb down and apologise for things, all of our lives would be easier, even as elements of the media queue up to attack anybody who ever has the basic decency to climb down and apologise. Ed Davey yesterday on this programme apologising for believing the lies of senior post office personnel when they told him that the Horizon scandal was a load of old hoo-ha being perpetrated by people trying to cover up their own crimes. I found it a fairly compelling apology, but of course plenty of people will be keen to continue making political capital out of it. So I have a knee-jerk reaction to a story like this, even though I know it's wrong. And I think it's the use of the phrase child abuse in the story that offends me the most or exercises my knee the most. Making pupils play rugby is a form of child abuse, study claims, and this is in the Times newspaper today. Children should no longer participate in high-impact sports such as rugby or boxing. It has become a form of child abuse and should be banned among under 18s. This is specifically rugby. The impact should be considered abusive to children's brains. So already the semantics are playing a part. Being abusive to children's brains is technically a form of child abuse. By putting the words child abuse in the headlines, we automatically start thinking of paedophiles, I think, or people who attacked children. The argument is also that schools can't seek informed consent from children, or certainly don't seek informed consent from children who could suffer injuries that affect them later in life. The researchers say parents do not understand the long-term risk of brain injuries and that sports organisations are effectively grooming adults to ignore the consequences. So, briefly, the collisions that you are likely to have on a rugby field and are certain to have in a boxing ring cause cognitive harm and increase the risk of neurodegenerative diseases and dementia. There have been some well-documented cases of rugby players suffering conditions and early deaths that they are certain are linked to forms of cognitive harm or brain damage that they suffered in their careers, and footballers, particularly in the days when the ball was much heavier than it is now and was routinely headed, particularly by defenders, have been well-documented cases of footballers struggling with that as well. The researchers in this case have examined medical evidence relating to sports that can cause serious brain injuries and concluded that the harm runs counter to child abuse laws. And that's when my knee relaxes. Do you see how it works? Don't be stupid. I played rugby at school. I found it character forming. There were times when I hated it, and I'll have some hilarious anecdotes to share with you shortly, and blah, blah, blah. And my knee is jerking furiously because you can't call it child abuse. And then I get to that last paragraph, and it simply says they examined medical evidence relating to sports that can cause serious brain injuries and concluded that the harm runs counter to child abuse laws. And I start thinking about what happened at my school, where there was actually quite a lot of traditional is the wrong word to use, criminal child abuse. There was, it's very well documented, both of the schools that I went to have seen teachers jailed for abusing my fellow pupils, something that thankfully I was spared, but it is one of the things that informs my passionate belief that people coming forward with allegations must be trusted and must be believed in the first instance. And the idea that we're comparing playing rugby to what happened to them initially sticks in my craw. But just remove that word, subject it, replace it for abusive to a brain, Think of it as different. Remove that word. Remove the image of Jimmy Savile or whoever it is that pops up in your brain when you hear the phrase child abuse, and listen to the facts, because the facts are these. Medical evidence shows that serious brain injuries are caused by these sports, and therefore the harm runs counter to child abuse laws. Now, that's medical experts, not legal experts. So, as ever with the law, there will be wriggle room and all manner of grey areas. But I think this story is fascinating for another reason. And that reason is this. I think the world will divide into people who know what schoolboy rugby is like, who will mostly be thinking, well, this is a bit ridiculous, never did me any harm. And people who've got no idea what schoolboy rugby is like, who, when they find out, will think, well, yeah, of course it should be flipping banned. Or, of course, it should be very, very, very heavily changed. Because it is utterly... I think back to my school days. It's extraordinary. The number of lads who had their collarbones broken was practically a pandemic of collarbone breakages. And, of course, that's something you can measure. You know how many people have had their collarbone broken, or you usually do. At my prep school, one chap went to see matron with a broken collarbone, and she gave him a fisherman's friend and told him to have a warm shower. But he had actually broken his collarbone. And that, I think, is probably the most common injury on a schoolboy's rugby pitch. But think about the impact needed to break that collarbone, right? And now imagine the same impact hitting that kid's head. And no one's going to know. And there might not be any immediate damage done. And lots of kids who got clocked around the head a lot on the rugby pitch might have turned out to be perfectly fine. But if it's a hard enough impact to regularly break a collarbone or an ankle or a leg... Have you ever been winded? Have you ever been winded? It's terrifying, right? Absolutely terrifying. You have that... Yeah, what were you doing when you got winded? But you got running around in the playground and stuff. It's happened to me 3 times in my life. Twice on the rugby pitch and once I fell out of a tree. And all of the air is removed from your lungs, right? Doctors are probably going to correct me on this. All of the air is removed from your lungs. And for about 10 seconds, you can't get any back in again. And like that. Just like that. And it's absolutely terrifying. And it's not... I don't think it does any lasting harm to you. But... Again, I'm thinking of the impact. If you've been hit hard enough to blast all the air out of your body, you've got someone's shoulder in your what's that bit called? Is that your solar plexus? Solar plexus is up here, isn't it? What's that bit there? Anyway, you've got all the air has been blown out of your lungs because someone's head has landed in your stomach in the middle of a ruck. What if it's your head? Like the impact. I mean, it is extraordinary. And then I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but you can see someone, particularly when you're playing schoolboy rugby. I wasn't a small kid. I was quite skinny, but so I'd play fullback or wing. I wasn't stocky enough to be a flanker, which is where I always wanted to play. But you are judged by your bravery on the rugby pitch, and I won't embarrass him by telling you his name. This was before I went to my second school, where international quality rugby players like the Easterby brothers and Lawrence Delalio played, but I'd kind of given up by them for reasons that will shortly become clear. At prep school, some lads failed the exam entrance for the next school. They failed the common entrance, right? And they'd stay on for another year to do the common entrance again to try to get into a public school. And that is quite a crucial year in terms of physical development. The transition from 13 to 14 or from 12.5 to 13.5 is often when puberty kicks in. So we would routinely have post-pubescent rugby players, like 1 or 2, on the same pitch as prepubescent rugby players. And I'll tell you now, I've rarely been more frightened in my life than as a skinny prepubescent 12-year-old watching a physically hairy man, a post-pubescent 14-year-old running towards me at full speed, and knowing that if I didn't stop him in his tracks, I would get into trouble. I'd either earn the disapproval of my teammates. This is the problem of playing full back. You're literally the last line of defence. There's a clue in the name. Or the teacher would tell me off. The PE teacher would tell me off. The rugby coach would tell me off for bottling it. I remember it's like I can see him. I can hear him. Coming towards me like a rhinoceros. And I'm standing, and you've got that minute. The worst thing that can happen in sport is that you allow your mind to drift. You allow yourself to think about, well, you've just got to act instinctively. And I just stood in front. I didn't even try to tackle him. I just put myself in front of him. And I went down like a tree. I put myself in front of him. I sort of began bending down, but there wasn't much point bending down. He was about 1.5 foot taller than me. And I just thought, I can't jump out of the way because then you get told off and all your mates will think you're a wuss. So I'll just stay here. And I mean, it'll be over soon. How bad can it be? The answer is very bad. He knocked me over flat. And I swear, I went down like a lamppost. And he just ran over me. He literally knocked me down, ran straight over me. And carried on to the finish line. And that wasn't the experience that made me think I'm not doing this anymore. That happened a couple of years later at big school. And that's not normal, right? If I say to you, do you want your 12-year-old boy to go out and get literally stampeded by hairy teenagers, what would you say? Exactly. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Is it possible for people who lived through this and can't quite grasp the idea that it might have been barbaric, is it possible that this is actually quite an important and relevant piece of research? 0345 6060 973. If, like me, you went through it and can feel the clouds clearing, your knee has stopped jerking, and you're remembering back to a similar moment, any young people who play rugby who are listening find themselves confronted with a similar problem coming up, go for a tap tackle. So you stand there, try and look as fearsome as you can, which in my case was not very much, and then try and time it so that as he's running towards you, you're turning with him as he passes. You go down, and as you go down, just try and tap his ankle. Like, this is one of the most beautiful things you can do in a sporting arena, because he doesn't know you've tackled him for about 2 or 3 paces. He goes down like a baby giraffe. So you take out his ankle as you go down as he passes, and then he's lost his balance, but at first no one watching can tell. So he kind of does. Have you ever seen that thing online about the road rage incident when the bloke is chasing the cyclist down the pavement? He jumps out of the car and he chases. Have you ever seen that? And he trips himself up. That's what happens with the tap tackle. It almost goes into slow motion. If you get that right, it's one of the most, especially if you're tiny and he's enormous. I tell you what, whatever you think about this tactic, it's a hell of a lot better than getting stampeded by a 14-year-old man mountain. So that's what you do. But the more I think about it and tell it to you, admittedly in a light-hearted fashion, the more absurd and possibly obscene I think it is that we would be routinely exposed to this. So point 1, it might have changed. Things might be very, very different now. But point 2, they weren't then. Point 3, if you're listening to this as an ingenue, as someone who knows nothing about schoolboy rugby, just tell me honestly, does this sound abusive to you? What I've just described to you? Does that sound... Because I think it might be. I genuinely think it might be. And yet, I don't think I could sign a petition calling for my old schools to stop playing rugby, because a part of me still loves it. One of my greatest regrets is giving up rugby, because I was actually quite good at it. But I thought I was rebelling against... It was like a religion at my school. And I was never going to be the best. And I had a problem in my youth. If I wasn't going to be the best at something, I didn't want to do it at all. So I concentrated on public speaking. And tennis, actually, I was quite good at. But playing rugby, I saw some magnificent... Lineker gave an interview the other day when he talked about scoring a goal. I think it was to Charlotte Edwards at The Guardian. And he just described it so perfect. He's got such a way with words, that man. He kind of says it's quite poignant in a way. There's never anything like it. That moment, imagine... in a stadium full of people scoring an important goal in an important match, but even at school, scoring an important try. And everyone on the touchline is magical. And I would really be loath to deny future generations those moments of magic. But thinking about the detail of what I've just described, how can anyone be in favour of it? It is abusive, isn't it? 0345 6060 973. It's 12:32 and Tim Humphrey is here with your headlines. It is 12:36 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. A lot of you are reminding me of the late, great Jonah Lomu bearing down upon one of the Underwood brothers. I think it was Rory. And the result was very, very similar. And look, the Underwoods were brilliant, brilliant rugby players. And when confronted with someone 3 or 4 times the size of them coming down the wing at 100 miles an hour, there was very, very little you could do about it. I'm not sure I would have taken Rory Underwood to one side and given him the benefit of my tap tackle technique in those circumstances. But if you want to get a rough idea of what it was like in Chaddesley Corbett in 1984, when a lad who'd stayed on for an extra year at school came barrelling towards me on a rugby pitch and literally ran over me like a bulldozer, or what are they called, a steam engine, then that is a fairly, albeit at a much higher level of rugby, a fairly clear distinction. But does it matter? I suppose we're asking where the line is between character forming and abusive. And I don't know. Paul's in Farnham. Paul, what do you think?
Hi, James. Thanks for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, I've just had loads of memories of rugby at school come flooding back to me hearing you talk about this topic. And yeah, I found the whole experience really quite traumatic. I was never really into like physical sports or anything like that. And I found the whole idea of rugby really quite scary. And on the days that we had matches or, practice, I would be shaking on the way to school. I'd be just so scared of getting hurt because, some of the boys did have some really bad injuries.
Yes.
But I want to talk about the kind of psychological aspect of it, because you've got this whole, kind of misogynistic culture of come on, man up,
yes.
Stop being a worse, all of this. And you're thinking, well, there must be something wrong with me because I'm scared, And after years of doing it, I didn't get any less scared. You just think, well, there must be something wrong with me because my parents are telling me I should be doing it. My teachers are telling me I should be doing it and telling me that I should be throwing myself in harm's way. And I just don't want to do it.
No, you put it like that. It'd be like getting your dinner served, wouldn't it? And the waitress says, oh, that plate's very hot. Make sure you touch it.
Yeah, exactly.
Quite bizarre.
I couldn't understand it. And I remember once before we were about to play our first match, I can't remember what position I was in, but the teacher said to me, with this position that you're going to be in, they might grab at your genitals. They're not supposed to, but they might. And I was thinking, what do you mean? Why would they be doing that?
Oh my days.
And he's like, well, they're not meant to, but it could happen. And I'm thinking, this is a strange game.
How old are you, if you don't mind?
I'm 36 now, but it was when I was sort of 12.
No, I appreciate that. I didn't think it happened yesterday. I presume that things have changed even in the 25 years since you were there. They've certainly changed a lot since I was there. And this is what they mean by informed consent in this research, because there was simply no opt-out when I was a kid. You couldn't not be there, even if you just stood on the... And again, I'm remembering names that I won't say out loud because that would be even worse than it would be for the 14-year-old Man Mountain who trampled me. Mm-hmm. There were kids who literally just stood outside for an hour, desperately trying to stay away from the ball and indeed everybody else. And now you put it like that, it makes more sense than running into the thick of it, doesn't it? It makes more sense. But you couldn't not be there. That's the point when you were young, I think. You couldn't say, I'm not playing rugby today.
No. And if you did stand on the outside, the teachers would be shouting at you, your teammates would be shouting at you.
Yes.
And you just feel humiliated and
so
horrendous.
Yours is a slightly different perspective on the injuries, because you're seeing the potential and then being forced to expose yourself to the potential injury as being both traumatic and potentially abusive. And I'm inclined to agree. That's much more easily fixed. That just says you don't have to play if you don't want to. And I presume that schools do that. Imagine you were 12 and you loved it. Should you be protected from it?
I think that they should make, reasonable attempts to protect the children. Maybe making sure everyone's of a similar height, weight.
Yeah, like in boxing, you'd never put a flyweight in the ring with a heavyweight, whereas I was a flyweight with a heavyweight running towards me on that day. But you couldn't. I don't know. That's the point, isn't it? That's the point where we both balk a bit at the idea of saying to a brilliant young rugby player, "Sorry, lads, that's it now. You'll have to hang your studs up until you're 18 or until you're 16. I don't know. That's why it's an interesting conversation. Paul, take care. Stays with you. The good stuff and the bad stuff. I mostly remember the good stuff, including things that I'm almost certain never happened. But I've mythologized them so often in my memory that I could almost swear blind that they did. But I just remembered the bad stuff. And I can still see the funny side at the time. But it was the second funniest thing that ever happened to me on a sports pitch. If you're very, very good, I'll tell you the funniest thing before I go home today. Or before I head to Wolverhampton, rather. Misha is in Brent. Misha, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello.
I think we have to make a distinction between how we're using child abuse and how we understand risk.
Okay.
And I think what we're talking about is how we mitigate risk for young kids in terms of how the game is actually played so that they can be safer in how they do it. So, for example, if you take something simple like heading a ball in football, there have been attempts to try and go, well, young kids shouldn't head the ball in football because we know that repeated heading is the trauma, is the brain trauma, the risk to the brain. So then how can you do it? Well, you could learn the technique of heading by using a soft ball, so that you're still learning the skill, but you're not putting the brain at risk. Or you could do it, with really young kids with a balloon. So what I'm saying is that it's how we mitigate the risk and how we.
But the risk of what? The risk of abuse.
Well, I mean.
You're like me. You're balking at the word because we're associating it with other forms of abuse. But abuse means, lots of. It fits as a word. It's just perhaps unhelpful. I like the phrase "abusive to the brain." So the heading that you describe, or the impact of a big clatter, that is abusive to children's brains. If they put that in the headline, if I was approaching this from a slightly more lazy point of view, I wouldn't have had a topic, would I? Because it's not. They're not. They've put child abuse in the headline, and we're all thinking about Jimmy Savile. But abusive to the brain, or protecting them from the thing you can't think of a word to describe because you're trying to avoid the word abuse, that's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about protecting them from potential damage, and the risks that are inherently within rugby are obvious and apparent. So then it's about how do you modify those activities, particularly for kids who've got, brains that are still works in progress and are much more vulnerable to any kind of impact injury having a long-lasting effect. It's like we have to change. The sport has to recognise, acknowledge and own those risks and change.
And it has a bit. I'm too old. I'm out of the loop and my girls don't play rugby, so I don't know what the score is now. But I presume it's already very different from what it was like in the 1980s.
I mean, I think, if you look at the introduction of tag rugby, for example, that was a recognition that things needed to be changed, things needed to be shifted. But, these conversations are ongoing, and the conversations are still ever present in terms of professional players at the elite end. It's like, how do we protect them? Because we have to think about safeguarding them.
And Doddy Weir's story will be popping into a lot of people's minds at the moment. What's your interest in this, Misha? You sound like you know what you're talking about, which makes one of us.
I'm a sports psychologist. And I researched into abuse in sport, like emotional abuse. Okay. So the abuse that you are talking about in terms of, emotional abuse. And also I have an understanding of trauma and brain trauma. So those things join up. So that's how I
and that's why
have some understanding.
Yeah, and that's why it's been such a powerful contribution, for which I thank you. 034560. Well, actually, I don't know why I'm giving out the number. There's already way too many people waiting to speak, and I'm supposed to do a woke watch before we go home today. Thank you, Misha. It's interesting. Something must be done. Normally, I reject that kind of lazy reaction for reaction's sake, and also we can probably all agree that the phrase child abuse is not helpful in the headline. But if you're listening, you don't listen, if you're perhaps listening for the first time, or you've not understood what I mean before when I talk about knee-jerk reactions, do you get it now? See how you read the headline, knee-jerk, you can't call it child abuse, don't be ridiculous, didn't do me any harm, it's character forming. The more you actually think about it and talk about it with fellow intelligent, thoughtful people, the more you realise that a story like this doesn't end up as the subject of quite high-level academic research unless there's something to it, and there clearly is. It's 12:46. This is good from No Hostages. If there was a video game that caused body and brain injuries in teenagers, it would be banned within a week, and parents who exposed their kids to it would get a visit from a social worker. Familiarity breeds acceptance. I like that phrase because, it's always been like that, and it didn't do me any harm. It's probably the cloak under which all manner of abuses continue unchecked in various societies. And, I'm not conflicted on this. I'm probably a bit dissonant, but there's a part of me that thinks, well, hang on a minute. If we stop kids playing rugby until they're older, proper rugby, full contact rugby, if that's a phrase, then and the Southern Hemisphere don't, then we're never going to win a World Cup again. So I know that's pathetic. Or if we stop, if the Irish and the English stop and the Welsh don't, then we'll never win a Triple Crown or a Six Nations. Anyway, I digress slightly. What do you think of this suggestion that making pupils play rugby is a form of child abuse? We probably should have focused on the M word rather than the C word. Making them do it is part of the problem here. So schools are still failing to provide the opt-out option. Andy got a mind a bit like mine. He says the whole conversation reminds me of the film Kes, when even the PE teacher, played famously by Brian Glover, was on the pitch. I know it was about football, but rugby was the same. I think that was a very good example of what rugby was like, more than football, perhaps. Guy's in Arundel in Sussex. Guy, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. Good to speak to you. I've been listening to your programme for a long time. I'm a first-time caller.
That's very kind.
You've changed my view of the world and politics.
That's a good
in general.
What, in the right direction?
I'm now on the other side.
I'm glad to hear it. Yes, I'm now a fully paid-up member of whatever Nigel Farage's latest party is called.
Not the Reclaim Party. Not the Reclaim Party. No.
Go on.
I've changed my politics anyway.
Yes.
But listen, talking about this abuse.
Yes.
I've been having therapy for a few years. I'm 52, like yourself.
Same.
I went to prep school and I went to public school. My prep school was led by a ex-South African general in the army, in South African army, pre-apartheid, so during the 50s and 60s.
Yes.
He was a sadist, and his wife also was a sadist. And I say this because, I broke my arm on the rugby pitch. I was also called the Tank because I was so big for my age.
Right.
I hated rugby. Absolutely hated it.
That never crossed my mind that the bloke who was powering towards me at 100 miles an hour might have hated it himself.
Well, I was a prop, and then I was number 8.
Yeah.
And then I was a fly half. Whatever position I was on, I told the headmaster, Mr. Hutchinson,
yes.
He's gone now, he's dead, but pass. But the school itself, they said if you don't play rugby, you have to run around the pitch for the entire match.
Oh, that's it, yeah.
So I tried that once, and of course I couldn't run around the pitch.
No, that's Guantanamo Bay territory, isn't it? That's proper.
Yeah. And the other thing is, we weren't allowed to wear underwear during rugby.
This is the 1980s.
This is the early 80s.
Yeah, 1980s prep schools where things happened that we say them. Are you married, Guy?
No, I'm gay.
You're gay. Have you got a husband or a partner?
No, I don't have.
At the moment, you're single at the moment. Because I tell my wife some of the stuff that I thought was perfectly normal at prep school, and I don't mean things that do get filed under child abuse. I mean things like you've just said. We played rugby and we weren't allowed to wear underwear. It's just so outside.
We had foot bars, a big foot bar, sunken foot bars in the changing rooms, which was always obviously full of dirt and disgusting.
Yes.
And we had to bathe in that naked.
Stop it! I'm getting flashbacks as well. But we're digressing slightly. Are you comfortable with the word abusive in the context of compulsory rugby?
I totally believe it was abusive, and so much so that my therapist told me that I suffer from boarding school syndrome.
Yes.
And I didn't realise that was a term that existed within psychotherapy.
Yes.
But I definitely do suffer from it because my father, I was the youngest of 5 kids, and my brother was the golden boy. He was brilliant at everything. He went to the same prep school. He's 8 years older than me, so he left the year that I joined.
And it's tricky. I'm similar, really, and it's very tricky because we were enormously privileged by some measures, by many measures, and we thought we were lucky, and our parents told us we were lucky. So it takes therapy quite often to realise that you deserve sympathy and you deserve treatment and you deserve care because these things have incredibly difficult and long-lasting impacts on you. What's the name of the guy I'm trying to think of, Guy? Who wrote the book?
I broke my wrist on the rugby field because the field was literally like concrete during the winter.
Oh, I remember.
And we were also in the uniform. We weren't allowed to wear trousers, even in winter.
No, shorts in the winter.
Corduroy shorts. Great corduroy shorts.
Cut your knees. You cut your thighs to ribbons.
We used to have garters around the socks.
Well, now it sounds like we're sounding like a Monty Python sketch comparing who was poorest. Because we had a fork in the sugar bowl. You weren't poor. We didn't. You a fork. You had a fork. Have you read? Have you?
At breakfast time, there would be a master on each table at the head of the table.
We went to identical schools.
We would come down to breakfast at 7:30, and the master.
This has got nothing to do with rugby.
No, I know. The master would be given extra toast.
Yes.
And we'd be cold by the time he'd finished his bit, 2 bits or 3 bits, and he would still have a part left. And we were like licking our lips, thinking, "Please, can I have another piece?"
Fighting over toast, and our parents were spending thousands of pounds. Have you read Nick Duffel's work on this? Have you read The Making of Them by Nick Duffel? Nick Duffel.
No, I haven't actually.
That's
no.
my gift to you for today, and it's quite hard for me to do that because I could have recommended How Not to Be Wrong by James O'Brien, which looks at quite a lot of the stuff we've just been talking about. But have a look at The Making of Them by Nick Duffel, because it's an incredibly powerful book and very influential in the recognition and study of boarding school syndrome. Take care, Guy. I enjoyed that conversation, but not necessarily for the right reasons. Speaking of anxiety or syndromes or trauma or whatever you prefer, happens to everybody. Happens to privileged people. Happens to just because you are comfortable in other areas of your life doesn't mean that you're not suffering in some areas. And it sort of came up during a beautiful conversation I had with Sheila Hancock last week, which is the full disclosure release for this week, in which I mean Sheila Hancock, she's been in everything. She's a dame. Literally, and there's nothing like a dame, and yet still, someone like that can suffer from terrible stage fright. You don't think that? Anyway, have a listen to this.
I've got a terrible confession to make that I have never really enjoyed acting because I've always suffered from terrible stage fright, crucifying stage fright, and it started with St. Joan.
Really?
Because I did one performance of it, and I think a lot of people said it was good.
Yes.
Which hadn't occurred to me.
Right.
And I remember years later when I worked for Joan Littlewood, who was a revelation to everybody, but I had a big success in a show called Make Me an Offer. Lots of reviews and things saying overnight. And the following night, I was terrified, standing in the wings, absolutely terrified. And I felt these arms round me, and it was Joan, and she was saying, and she whispered in my ear, and she said, "Darling, you're in a nasty, dark forest full of beasts and frightening things, and on there is light and loveliness," and then shoved me on the stage.
Onto the stage.
And it was a wonderful thing. I've used it ever since when I've been scared of. But I think most actors who get stage fright, and most actors do get stage fright, is that we assume the audience are going to hate us. And certainly on first nights, we assume the critics are going to hate us. And Joan's thing was saying, no, actually, out there is love. And certainly in my entire career, I know that to be true. Yes. There is enormous love. It can change overnight if you say something wrong.
Of course.
But there is a generosity of spirit from audiences.
People want to like what they're
watching. They do. They've paid a lot of money.
You know, apart from critics, perhaps, most people turn up wanting to enjoy.
They do. But then you're tortured with the thought that you don't want to let them down.
Yes.
I remember you've done it 100 times. And you've got to make it seem it's the first time that they've seen it. So it's quite challenging.
Yeah, a wonderful woman, wonderful actor, Dame Sheila Hancock, this week's guest on Full Disclosure, which is going through a bit of a rich seam at the moment, and quite a few thespians as well, who, if you can, I don't know, I like interviewing actors, and if you can get to that rich seam of memories and stories and anecdotes, it's wonderful stuff. You'll enjoy that one, trust me. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, the official LBC app, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. If you're coming to the gig in Wolverhampton tonight, I look forward to seeing you there. Mine's a Bathams, usually. You could put a few behind the bar for me. And tomorrow night, of course, I'm in Nottingham, which is sold out already, I think, although there might be some restricted view seats available, which I suppose in the circumstances could be viewed as a bonus. Download Global Player for free from. Thank you. Flipping heck.
Never.
Download Global Player for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
Thank you very much, James. 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 Thank you very much, James.